My name's Marcus. I'm 36 years old, and I guess you could say I'm the kind of guy who likes to keep the peace. I'm not flashy, not dramatic, and definitely not someone who seeks attention. I've always been the helper, the one who steps up when others fall short. Maybe that's my flaw, or maybe it's the reason this whole thing happened in the first place. I never imagined I'd be writing something like this, but after the past few months, I needed to get it out. If you've ever bent over backward for someone only to get kicked in the teeth, you'll understand. This all started with my cousin Erica's wedding. Erica and I grew up like siblings. Our moms are sisters, and when her dad passed away when she was 13, mine kind of stepped in for a while. We were close, movie marathons, sleepovers, shared birthdays, you name it. She called me her big brother who wasn't technically her brother, and for most of my life, I wore that title with pride. So when she got engaged to Tyler, a guy she met on a ski trip and started dating during the lockdowns, I was genuinely happy for her. A little surprised, because he always seemed performative, I guess. Like he was playing a role, trying to impress everyone in the room, especially Erica. But she lit up around him, and I told myself that was all that mattered. Family means you support each other, right? Well, the wedding planning kicked off in full force early last year. Erica was over the moon, and she looped me into everything. I figured she just wanted me to be involved, until I realized I was being asked to pay for everything. First, it was the deposit on the venue because her fiancé's family was still moving money around. Then it was the catering. Apparently, his stepmom had a falling out with the chef, and they didn't want to deal with that drama. Then the photographer backed out, and guess who happened to know a guy and got roped into paying for that too? Yeah, at first, I didn't mind. I genuinely thought I was helping. I make decent money running a logistics firm, nothing extravagant, but enough to afford some generosity. I chalked it up to being part of my role in her life, especially since she told me she wanted me to walk her down the aisle alongside her mom. That part meant the world to me. So I smiled through the invoices, signed the contracts, even arranged a special shipment for the $5,000 French champagne she had her heart set on. By the time the RSVPs were out, I had already spent close to 20 grand. And I wasn't keeping score, at least not yet. Things started to feel off about 2 months before the wedding. Communication slowed. Erica stopped replying to texts. Tyler, who had always been polite but distant, started acting even colder when I'd call to confirm payments. I figured they were just stressed. Weddings are intense. I didn't want to be that guy who made it about himself. But then came the bridal shower. Or rather, the bridal shower I wasn't invited to. I only found out it happened because my aunt posted pictures on Facebook, Erica in a white sundress, grinning next to balloons and a cake that said Future Mrs. Hamilton. I thought maybe it was a women-only thing, but even our younger cousin Michael, he's 17, was there, holding a tray of mimosas. So yeah, it felt deliberate. Still, I didn't say anything. I didn't want to ruin anything. I told myself I was overthinking. Until a week before the wedding, when everything imploded. I was sitting in my office, wrapping up logistics for the last shipment of decor items Erica had custom ordered, some ridiculous flower arch that needed a refrigeration unit during delivery, when I got a text. It was from Erica's maid of honor, Kayla. The message said, "Hey Marcus, just giving you a heads up. Erica's really stressed and feeling anxious. Tyler's family thinks it might be better if you don't attend the wedding. They said you can be a little intense sometimes, and Erica doesn't want any drama. Hope you understand." I read it 3 times. My first reaction was confusion, then disbelief, and then a wave of nausea hit me so hard I had to sit down. I was being uninvited, not by Erica directly, but through her maid of honor. After everything, the venue, the food, the champagne, the damn generator I booked as a backup in case the power went out because the venue was on a remote estate that had electrical issues in the past. I called her. Straight to voicemail. I texted, "Hey," saw Kayla's message. "Is this real? You want me to stay away from your wedding?" No reply. Not that day. Not the next day. Nothing. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I didn't try to clear the air like I might have done in the past. Something in me just shut off. I thought about every time I'd prioritized her needs over my own, every check I'd written without a second thought, every family dinner where I defended her relationship when others raised eyebrows. I thought about my dad, who always said, the easiest way to spot the users is to stop being useful. I thought about the champagne order, the refrigeration truck, the electrical backup, all booked under my name, all paid with my card, all refundable if you act fast enough. So I made a few calls. I started with the generator company. They were more than happy to process the cancellation since I was still within the 72-hour window. Then I called the supplier holding the champagne. It was a premium distributor, and when I explained the situation with just enough fake sadness in my voice, they not only refunded me but offered to put the bottles on a waiting list for another client. The refrigerated truck? Canceled. The driver even thanked me, said he hated long wedding shifts. Then I called the catering company. Now, this one was tricky because the deposit was non-refundable, but the balance? Not yet paid. And guess who held the payment info? Me. So I told them I wouldn't be covering the rest and to expect a call from the bride's side. I didn't say anything else. I didn't warn anyone. I let the silence do the talking. I stayed home the day of the wedding, ordered some takeout, put on a basketball game, and turned off my phone. I didn't need to watch it burn. I already knew what I'd lit. But when I woke up the next morning, that's when it all hit. 132 missed calls. Erica, Kayla, my aunt, even Tyler. Text like, "Where are you? What happened to the generator? The champagne delivery never showed. Did you cancel the power? Call me now. This is serious, Marcus. You ruined everything." And then the social media posts started surfacing. There were blurry iPhone clips at first, guests fanning themselves with programs in a dim, sweltering ballroom. Then videos of people trying to take selfies in the dark, flashlights on, makeup melting, tempers flaring. One shaky video showed a waiter explaining to a group of clearly irritated guests that the kitchen was unable to continue serving the entree course due to refrigeration failure. Another had the DJ packing up in silence while someone off-screen yelled, "You said this was handled." But the one that really made me sit back and breathe deep was a 3-second clip someone posted on TikTok. It was Erica. Her perfectly styled hair clinging to her neck with sweat, mascara smudged, screaming into a phone, "I don't care how. Just get the lights back on. This is supposed to be my day." It took off. The caption? "When the power and the catering bail on your perfect wedding." The comments were brutal. "This is why you don't treat the people funding your fantasy like trash. Karma got the invite after all. Imagine paying for a $50,000 disaster mail." I recognized some usernames. Friends of friends. Family members. Even a couple of my coworkers who texted me laughing, asking, "Was this the wedding you were paying for?" For a few hours, I just sat there, watching the fallout, watching her curated, filtered dream unravel in real time. There was a strange satisfaction in it, but also a deep, hollow ache. Because despite everything, despite the entitlement, the disrespect, I hadn't wanted it to go down like this. I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition. I wanted a call that said, "Hey, I'm sorry. I was stressed. I took it out on you." I would have forgiven her. But instead, she doubled down. Around noon that day, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a voice message from Erica. No greeting. No apology. Just a clipped, furious voice saying, "I know what you did. You think you're clever? You embarrassed me. You made me look like a fool in front of Tyler's family. You think people don't know? You're the only one petty enough to pull something like this. You better hope I forget this ever happened. Because I swear, Marcus, I will never speak to you again." I laughed. Out loud. Not because it was funny, but because it was just pathetic. Even after all that, she saw herself as the victim. No mention of the text that uninvited me. No mention of the thousands I spent. No accountability. Just venom and blame. And still, I waited. For maybe a sliver of self-awareness. A follow-up message. Something. Anything. But nothing came. What had come were the stories. Apparently, Tyler's family was livid. His father stormed out halfway through the reception when the power didn't come back and the champagne never flowed. Guests left early, the dance floor never opened, and half the photos were taken in near darkness. The backup cake, which Erica had downgraded me to paying for after accidentally choosing a more expensive floral display, melted. And because the photographer's battery packs weren't properly charged, there were no reception photos at all. I heard through the grapevine that Tyler was embarrassed beyond words. That his parents blamed her for letting some unstable cousin handle the logistics. That the honeymoon was postponed for emotional reasons. That their wedding hashtag trended for all the wrong reasons. And that the venue had already shared an internal memo warning staff about non-payment, high-maintenance clients. Still, I stayed quiet. I didn't comment. I didn't defend myself. I didn't need to. Everyone knew. The truth always has a way of slipping out, even when you try to spin it. Erica could cry sabotage all she wanted, but the receipts? They were in my inbox. The contracts were in my name. and I'd kept the entire paper trail just in case. It was a few days later when my aunt finally called. At first, she tried the guilt route. Said Erica was distraught, that she didn't mean to exclude me, and that it had all been a big misunderstanding blown out of proportion. I didn't even get angry. I just calmly said, she told me I was too embarrassing to be seen at her wedding. I didn't argue. I just stopped helping. There was a long silence on the other end. And then my aunt said something I'll never forget. You know, she looked up to you. You were like a second father to her. I replied, then maybe she should have treated me like family. That was the end of it. No more calls. No more texts. Just silence. But the damage was done. Not by me. By her. And she's the one who has to live with that. But that wasn't even the part that changed everything. That came 2 weeks later, when I got an envelope in the mail, no return address, just my name, handwritten in soft cursive. I opened it and found a small, folded note. No apology. No explanation. Just 4 words scribbled in ink that had bled slightly from what I assume were tears. I shouldn't have done that. There was no signature. But I knew the handwriting. And that's when everything shifted. I sat there with the note in my hands, reading those 4 words over and over again like they were some kind of riddle. I shouldn't have done that. It was barely even an apology. No details. No ownership. No attempt to fix anything. Just a whisper of regret, written in the kind of hesitant ink that made me wonder if she wrote it with a trembling hand. And honestly, that part hurt more than the screaming, the blame, the coldness. Because it told me that somewhere deep down, she knew what she did, but not enough to say it to my face. For a few hours, I kept the note on the kitchen counter while I paced the living room. I thought about everything that led to that moment. About the 10-year-old version of Erica who used to knock on my bedroom door with a bowl of popcorn and a blanket, begging for a movie night. About the time in high school when she called me crying after a fight with her mom, and I picked her up and we sat in my car listening to music for 2 hours until she calmed down. About how, for years, I was the one who showed up when no one else did. And I realized something that I probably should have realized a long time ago. I wasn't grieving the wedding or even the money. I was grieving the version of her that no longer existed. The girl who used to light up when I walked into the room. The one who made friendship bracelets with me when we were kids. The one who hugged me at my dad's funeral and said I was the strongest person she knew. That person? She didn't write that note. Someone else did. Someone colder. Someone who saw people as pieces on a wedding vision board. People who either fit into her aesthetic or didn't. So I tucked the note back into the envelope and slid it into a drawer I rarely open. Not to keep it, but to remind myself that even the people who mean the most to you can change. That sometimes the line between family and stranger is just one selfish choice away. But the fallout wasn't done yet. Word had spread, not just about the wedding disaster, but about the way Erica had handled the aftermath. Apparently, one of Tyler's cousins, someone I'd never even met, posted a long rant in a Facebook group for wedding planners. She didn't name names, but she described everything in painful detail: the blacked-out ballroom, the overheated guests, the champagne that never arrived, the entitled bride who ghosted the person who funded half her wedding. It went viral. Comments poured in. Vendors shared their horror stories. People speculated. And within days, the story got picked up by a lifestyle blog that did a full expose on the wedding that melted down literally. Erica tried to do damage control. She took down all the wedding photos from her Instagram, made her profile private, tried posting vague quotes like, "Some people will betray you no matter how much you give," and "protect your energy." But it didn't work. People knew. And even worse, for her, at least, so did her new in-laws. I didn't hear this directly, but my aunt, who has never been great at keeping things to herself, slipped it out during a phone call with my mom. Tyler had started pulling back. Cold shoulders. Short answers. Talking about trust and image and how you can't build a marriage on secrets and disaster. I wasn't sure whether to feel sorry for her or not, but I did know one thing: she'd built the whole thing on a cracked foundation. And now the cracks were showing. It was around this time that I got a call from someone unexpected, the photographer I had originally booked. His name was Elijah, a guy I'd gone to college with. He'd done corporate shoots for my company before, so I trusted him. He called me up and said, "Hey, man, I just wanted to say thank you." I asked what he meant. He said, "I got 10 new bookings this week." Apparently, someone on Reddit found out I was almost the guy who shot that wedding and gave me a shout out for dodging a bullet. You wouldn't believe how many brides have told me they're glad I wasn't involved. We laughed about it, But after we hung up, I sat there thinking, somehow, without ever saying a word publicly, I'd become the ghost in the story. The unnamed man behind the chaos. The shadow figure who flicked the first domino and walked away. And maybe that was for the best. I didn't need to be seen. I didn't need applause. I just needed peace. But peace has a strange way of getting interrupted. One afternoon, maybe a month after the wedding, I got a knock on my door. I wasn't expecting anyone, and when I looked through the peephole, it was Tyler. He looked different, less polished. His shirt was wrinkled, collar undone. He was holding something in his hand, an envelope. I hesitated, then opened the door. Before I could say anything, he said, "Can we talk?" And in that moment, standing there with the man who married the person who had treated me like a stain on her perfect canvas, I felt the final shift. Because I could tell from the look in his eyes, this wasn't about patching things up. This was about secrets. And whatever was in that envelope was going to change everything. Tyler stood on my doorstep like a man who hadn't slept in days. His eyes were bloodshot, not from crying, I could tell, but from the kind of mental exhaustion you only get when the person you thought you knew turns out to be someone else entirely. I didn't say anything for a second, just looked him over. He wasn't holding himself the way he used to at family events, shoulders back, smug little smirk, polished to the nines like he was born to wear a tailored suit. He looked small now, unraveled. "I won't take much of your time," he said, voice low, "but I needed to give you this." He handed me the envelope, nodded once, and turned to go. "You're not going to explain what this is?" I asked, staring down at the unsealed flap. Tyler paused, then sighed. "You'll figure it out. And I'm sorry, man. I really am. You didn't deserve any of it." Then he walked back to his car, climbed in, and pulled away. Inside, I closed the door behind me and sat down at the kitchen counter. My hands didn't shake, but I could feel my chest tightening like my body already knew something heavy was coming. I opened the envelope and pulled out a thick stack of papers. The first one was a letter, typed, no salutation, no signature. It read, "You should know the truth." I didn't want to believe it at first. But when the dust settled, I started asking questions. I asked to see the budget, the receipts. I asked where the money came from, why the accounts didn't match up, why there were charges on cards that didn't belong to us. She lied, repeatedly, until she couldn't anymore. My stomach dropped. She told me you offered to pay, that you insisted, that you'd said it was your gift, but the text messages said otherwise. Screenshots, emails, invoices signed with your name. I saw them all. I found your name on every contract, your card on every deposit. You didn't volunteer, she volunteered you, and then erased you. Page after page followed. A timeline. Screenshots of Erica's group chats where she and Kayla joked about how far Marcus will go before he finally gets tired. One read, "If he wants to play Daddy Warbucks, I say let him." Another said, "He'll be lucky we even give him a seat. We just need him for the power and the booze." A third, "After I was cut from the guest list, crisis averted. Don't need him embarrassing me in front of Tyler's family. If he gets upset, let him cry into his receipts." I sat there in silence, not even angry, just stunned. Stunned that someone I once protected like a sister, someone who had leaned on me for years, had reduced me to a wallet and a punchline. But the worst part wasn't what she said. It was how casual it all was. Like I was nothing. Like the erasure of a decade of love and loyalty was just a matter of digital housekeeping. At the very bottom of the stack was a photocopy of a check, written from one of Erica's joint accounts with Tyler. It was made out to cash. 5 figures. In the memo line, "Final vendor payoff, do not ask Marcus." It clicked then. She had planned to cut me out long before that text from Kayla. I wasn't supposed to see the wedding. I wasn't supposed to be there. I was only ever meant to fund it and disappear. Her perfect day didn't have room for me. Not my face, not my presence, not even my name. And when I took that away, the whole thing collapsed. I kept the documents. Not for revenge, not for leverage, but for closure. The final puzzle pieces falling into place. And with that, I made a decision. I blocked her. On everything. Phone, email, social. I deleted the voicemails. I stopped asking how she was doing when I called my mom. I told my aunt that I wished her well, but I was done playing the role of the family ATM and therapist. I wasn't cruel. I wasn't vindictive. I just stopped. Weeks passed. Then months. Word got around that Tyler had moved out. I don't know the full story, and honestly, I don't care to. I heard there were counseling sessions. That Erica tried to spin the wedding disaster into some sort of growth moment. that she was starting a blog about healing through hardship. I never looked it up. One afternoon in early spring, I went through that drawer, the one with the envelope she'd sent me. I stared at that note again. I shouldn't have done that. I held it for a moment, then folded it neatly, walked out back, and set it on the grill. Watched the paper curl and blacken until it was just ash. It felt like burning a memory. Freedom, in its simplest form. I didn't get revenge. I got clarity. And that was enough. Since then, I've put my time and money toward people who actually see me. A friend from college, and I started a nonprofit that helps pay for weddings for couples coming out of hardship, vets, immigrants, people rebuilding after loss. I fund them quietly. No speeches. No recognition. Just one condition. I have to see the invite list first. And when people ask me about the worst investment I ever made, I just smile and say, it taught me how to stop funding people who don't value you. Because sometimes, the real revenge is moving on without ever looking back. My name is Lucas. I'm 28. And if you had told me 5 years ago that my own parents would orchestrate the end of my relationship just to push my girlfriend toward my wealthy cousin, I would have laughed and said, that's absurd. Back then, I still believed family meant loyalty, support, and maybe the occasional awkward holiday dinner. I thought my parents were proud of me, or at least content with who I was. But in reality, I was just a placeholder, a stepping stone in their endless pursuit of social climbing. It started subtly enough. My girlfriend at the time, Emily, and I had been together for 2 years. We weren't rich, but we were happy. I was working at a small architecture firm, slowly building my career, and she was a teacher. We shared a one-bedroom apartment that was far from glamorous, but it was ours, and it was filled with laughter, takeout dinners, and the occasional leaky faucet I couldn't quite fix. My parents, well, they didn't exactly hide their disappointment. Every time we visited, my mom would find a way to slip in comments like, so, Lucas, any plans to move to a bigger firm? Or, Emily, have you ever considered a different career? Teaching doesn't really elevate you. My dad would just sit there, silent, but nodding in agreement with every backhanded remark. At first, I brushed it off. They'd always been like that. Obsessed with appearances, obsessed with money. I figured as long as Emily and I were happy, their opinions didn't matter. But then came the cousin, Ethan. My mom adored him. He's so ambitious, she'd say, so successful. Ethan worked in finance, drove a shiny black car that probably cost more than our apartment building, and had this smug, charming grin that made people trust him, even when they shouldn't. I'd never been particularly close to him, but suddenly, he was at every family gathering. My mom always made sure to invite Emily too. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I started noticing little things. The way my mom would insist Emily sit next to Ethan at dinner so they can talk about travel because he'd been to such amazing places. Or the way my dad would lean over to me, half smiling, and say, you could learn a thing or two from Ethan. I even caught my mom whispering to Emily once, her voice low but her words just clear enough. You know, Ethan could give you everything you've ever wanted. When Emily came home that night, she was quieter than usual. I asked her what was wrong, but she brushed it off. Still, over the next few weeks, she seemed distracted. I'd find her scrolling through travel websites late at night or staring off during dinner. My parents, meanwhile, doubled down. They invited us to a weekend at their vacation home, just to relax. But when we arrived, Ethan was already there. My mom greeted us at the door, practically glowing. Oh, isn't it perfect? Now you can all spend some time together. I remember feeling like an outsider in my own family's home. That weekend was the first time I felt it, that gnawing suspicion that something was happening behind my back. My parents were attentive to Emily in a way they'd never been before. My mom poured her wine, asked about her childhood dreams, told her she was too special to waste her life struggling. And Ethan, he knew exactly what he was doing. He was charming, attentive, listening to every word she said like she was the only person in the room. I kept telling myself I was overreacting, but deep down, I knew. The breaking point came a month later. Emily sat me down one evening, her hands trembling as she spoke. She said she needed to think about her future, that she wasn't sure we wanted the same things. And then she told me my parents had been honest with her, that they thought I'd never be able to give her the life she deserved. She didn't say Ethan's name, but she didn't have to. I could see it in her eyes. I wanted to fight for her. I wanted to scream, to tell her my parents were manipulating her, that Ethan wasn't the answer. But something in her expression told me it wouldn't matter. She'd already made her decision. So I just sat there, numb, and listened as the life I thought I was building fell apart piece by piece. And when she finally walked out the door, my parents didn't even pretend to hide their satisfaction. That was the day something inside me shifted. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I simply walked away from Emily, from my parents, from the idea that they would ever see me as enough. I told myself I'd never look back. What I didn't know then was that walking away was the first step toward building something far greater than I could have imagined, and that one day, they'd regret every single word they said. But before that day came, I had to hit my lowest point and start climbing. In the months after Emily left, the air between my parents and me was thick with unspoken judgment. They didn't just distance themselves. They seemed to actively push me further to the sidelines, like I'd failed some unspoken family test and was now irrelevant. Calls from my mom became rare, and when they did come, they were transactional. "Your cousin just got promoted again," she'd say, skipping right over any question about how I was doing. Or worse, "Ethan and Emily are going to Bali. Can you imagine?" I told them they deserve it. I'd sit there gripping my phone, my chest tight, forcing myself not to react. It wasn't just that they favored Ethan. It was that they wanted me to see it, to feel it. Every holiday gathering became a stage for them to flaunt his success and the life Emily now had. At Christmas, my parents hosted dinner at their house. I almost didn't go, but I knew if I skipped it, they'd take it as proof I couldn't handle seeing them happy. So I showed up, wearing my best suit, determined to keep my composure. The moment I walked in, Ethan was there, standing beside Emily in the foyer. She looked different. Her hair was lighter, styled in some expensive-looking way, and she wore a dress that probably cost more than my rent. My mom's voice floated from the kitchen. "Lucas, don't they look perfect together?" The words hit like a slap, but I forced a smile, murmuring something polite. Dinner was worse. My parents seated me at the far end of the table, not even next to them, while Ethan and Emily sat at the center, flanked by my mom and dad like they were the guests of honor. Conversation flowed around them. Ethan's latest deal, the property they were thinking of buying, the charity gala they'd been invited to. Whenever I tried to join in, my comments were either ignored or brushed aside with a quick, "That's nice, Lucas," before they went right back to fawning over Ethan. Halfway through dinner, my dad clinked his glass and announced that Ethan had just bought a penthouse in the city. "You should see the view," my mom added, beaming at Emily. Then, with a glance down the table at me, she said, "Lucas, maybe you can visit sometime. It might give you inspiration." The room erupted in polite laughter, but I caught the smirk on Ethan's face. It was the same one he wore back when we were kids, and he beat me at something, smug, knowing he'd won. After that night, I started noticing how deep their favoritism ran. When my birthday came around a few months later, I didn't even get a call. I found out later my parents had spent the weekend at Ethan's lake house, and Emily had posted photos of them all toasting on the dock. The caption read, "Family is everything." I stared at that post for a long time, not sure if the knot in my chest was anger, sadness, or both. Then came the worst of it. My mom invited me over one afternoon, saying she wanted to catch up. Foolishly, I went. She greeted me at the door, all smiles, then led me to the living room where Ethan and Emily were waiting. "We thought it'd be nice to spend some time together," she said sweetly, but her eyes had that calculating glint. The conversation started off civil, but soon Ethan began talking about a business opportunity, a small real estate investment, and how he was thinking of letting the family in on it. That's when my mom leaned forward and said, "Lucas, maybe this is your chance to finally get on the right track. Ethan could mentor you. You could learn how to build something for yourself. Maybe then you could attract someone like Emily." She said it as if Emily weren't sitting right there, as if my worth was measured entirely by who I could date and how much I could spend on them. I sat there, every muscle in my body taut, trying not to let them see how much it stung. That day, as I drove home, I realized something. They weren't just being cruel. They wanted me to feel small. They wanted me to accept my place beneath Ethan, beneath their expectations. But if there's one thing about me they never understood, it's that I don't break quietly. And that's when the idea started forming, not for revenge yet, but for escape. I knew I had to get away, cut every tie, and build a life so far removed from theirs that one day, they wouldn't recognize me. I just didn't know yet how far that journey would take me, or how much higher I'd climb. It happened on a rainy Thursday, one of those days where the sky feels like it's pressing down on you. I was at work, buried in a project deadline, when my phone started buzzing relentlessly. At first, I ignored it. But after the fifth call in a row from the same number, my mother's, I stepped outside to answer, bracing myself for whatever trivial crisis she'd cooked up. Her voice was unusually calm, almost rehearsed. "Lucas," she began, "I wanted you to hear this from me before you saw it online." My stomach sank. She paused, like she was savoring the moment. "Ethan and Emily are engaged." For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. My mind scrambled to process it. The same Ethan who had hovered around her at family gatherings. The same Emily who swore she just needed time to think when she left me. My chest tightened. "When?" I asked, my voice flat. "They got engaged last night," she said, almost cheerfully. "We had a little celebration. It was beautiful. You should be happy for them, Lucas. They're perfect for each other." I could hear clinking glasses and faint laughter in the background. They were still together, celebrating. I don't remember what I said next. I think it was something short, maybe just "I see." But what I do remember, crystal clear, is the moment I hung up and felt the weight of it hit me. It wasn't just that Emily had moved on. It wasn't even just that she'd moved on with my cousin. It was that my parents had facilitated it, encouraged it, and now they were flaunting it like it was some fairy tale ending. By the time I got home that evening, the news was all over social media. Emily had posted a photo of her and Ethan on a balcony, the city skyline behind them, her hand raised to show off a glittering ring. My mom had commented, "Couldn't be happier for you both." My dad had liked every single post about it. And then, buried in the comments section, I saw it. A family friend writing, "Didn't she used to date Lucas?" Followed by someone else replying, "Yeah, but she upgraded." I wish I could say I brushed it off, but the truth is I sat in my apartment for hours, staring at that ring, the smiles, the celebration I hadn't been invited to. My parents had chosen sides. No, they'd gone beyond that. They'd actively pushed me out of my own life. The final blow came a week later when I received an invitation in the mail. It was for their engagement party, hosted at my parents' house. The card read, "Join us in celebrating the union of Emily and Ethan, a match made in heaven." There was no handwritten note, no attempt at softening the blow. Just a printed card, addressed to me like I was any other distant acquaintance. I didn't go, of course, but the night of the party, I drove by. The driveway was lined with expensive cars, the windows glowing warm with light. I could hear music and laughter spilling into the damp night air. Through the large living room window, I caught a glimpse of my parents raising their glasses in a toast, Ethan with his arm around Emily's waist. Something in me hardened in that moment. It wasn't anger anymore, it was resolve. This was my breaking point, the moment I knew I'd never play their game again. I wouldn't beg for a place at their table. I'd build my own, and one day, it would be a table they couldn't even dream of sitting at. I turned the car around and drove away without looking back. That was the night I started my real escape plan, the one that would eventually set everything in motion for what was to come. The weeks after the engagement party felt like a long, cold winter that wouldn't end, even though the calendar said it was spring. Every part of my life seemed to slow down, like I was moving through thick mud. Work became mechanical. I showed up, I finished my projects, I went home. My apartment, once filled with little signs of Emily's presence, now felt too quiet, like the silence was pressing in on me from all sides. I didn't have much of a social circle outside of her, and the people I thought I could lean on either didn't understand or didn't want to get in the middle of family drama. The few who did check in would say things like, "You'll meet someone else," or "At least now you know the truth," as if that was supposed to make the betrayal sting less. It didn't. Bills started piling up. I was still paying off my car, rent was due, and I didn't exactly have a safety net. My parents had never offered to help me financially, but they made sure I knew they were spending generously on Ethan and Emily's new life. My mom once accidentally sent me a text meant for Emily, asking her if she wanted my parents to cover the cost of the honeymoon as a gift. She didn't even apologize when I called her out, just said, "Oh, well, you saw it anyway. It's not a big deal." The loneliness was the worst part. Some nights I'd find myself scrolling through old photos, seeing the smile on Emily's face when we took weekend trips, remembering how my parents used to at least pretend to care about my life. Now, they spoke to me like I was some distant relative they barely knew. On the rare occasion I visited, I felt like a stranger in my own family's home. My room had been turned into a guest room, complete with stage decor, a perfect backdrop for when Emily and Ethan stayed over. One evening, after another long day at work, I sat in the dark at my small kitchen table, staring at a piece of mail from my parents. It wasn't a letter, just a glossy flyer for a charity gala they were helping host. On the front was a photo of Ethan and Emily from a previous event, looking like the perfect couple. My parents had written, "You should come. It might be good for you to network," in my mom's looping handwriting. Something about that moment, the quiet, the cheap overhead light buzzing above me, the stage perfection of their world pressed into my hands, made me realize I couldn't keep living like this. I was stuck in their shadow, and they wanted me to stay there. But I wasn't going to. I started saving every extra dollar I could. I stopped going out, cut every unnecessary expense, and began researching opportunities outside the city, anywhere I could start over where their reach wouldn't matter. At first, it was just a vague idea. Move somewhere new, get a fresh job, rebuild quietly. But over time, it became more deliberate. I looked into certifications, found a couple of business mentors online, and started teaching myself skills that could open doors. I didn't tell a soul, not my friends, not my coworkers, and definitely not my family. The hardest part was keeping my head down when my parents kept testing me. They'd call to brag about Ethan's promotions, send me photos from family vacations I wasn't invited to, or, accidentally, mention how much they loved Emily's taste in decor when I visited. I learned to respond with a neutral, "That's nice," and then let the silence stretch until they were the ones scrambling to fill it. Underneath all that quiet compliance, though, I was building something. I didn't know exactly where it would lead yet, but I knew I'd get out. And I knew one day, when they least expected it, I'd be standing in a place so far above their condescension that they'd choke on the sight. But first, I had to disappear, and that part was going to require more than just packing a bag. Leaving wasn't dramatic. There was no big announcement, no confrontation. One morning, I packed the essentials into my car, clothes, a few keepsakes, my laptop, and drove out of the city without telling a single person where I was going. I left my phone number the same, but I stopped answering calls from my parents unless absolutely necessary. If they wanted to picture me stuck in the same small apartment, still struggling, I wasn't going to correct them. I moved to a coastal city 3 hours away, a place where no one knew my name or my family's reputation. The rent was cheaper, and the air smelled like salt water instead of exhaust fumes. I found a small apartment above a coffee shop and started a new job at a mid-sized design firm that actually valued my work. It wasn't glamorous, but it was stable, and for the first time in years, I was surrounded by people who respected me for my skills, not my bank account or my last name. That was just the foundation. In the evenings, I poured every spare hour into an idea I'd been sketching out since the lowest point of my life, a side business designing high-end custom interiors for vacation homes. At first, it was just me and a few clients I found through local ads. Then one client recommended me to another, and that one brought 2 more. Word of mouth spread faster than I expected. Within a year, I was making more from my side business than from my full-time job. By the second year, I took the leap. I quit the firm and went all in. I hired a small team, rented a proper studio space, and rebranded under a sleek new company name. We specialized in complete transformations for luxury coastal properties, and soon our designs were being featured in regional magazines. I went from scraping together bills to signing contracts worth more than my annual salary used to be. Along the way, I changed too. I traded my old worn-out clothes for tailored suits, learned how to network with high-end clients, and started attending events I once thought were reserved for people like Ethan. My confidence grew with every deal closed, every property reveal that left clients speechless. For the first time, I wasn't just surviving. I was building something entirely my own. And then came the milestone that shifted everything. A call from an international property investor who had seen my work online. He wanted my company to handle the design for an entire chain of luxury villas. The contract was massive, more money than I'd ever imagined earning in a single project. Signing it meant not only financial freedom, but the ability to expand my business beyond anything I'd pictured when I was sitting alone in that dim kitchen years ago. I bought a home. Not just any home, but a sprawling waterfront property with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view that stretched out to the horizon. I drove past the gates every day thinking, they wouldn't believe this is mine. I started attending galas, charity events, and high-profile openings, not as someone's guest, but as a sponsor, a name on the invitation. The funny thing is, I still kept my success quiet from my parents. They probably thought I'd disappeared into mediocrity, still struggling while Ethan and Emily lived the dream. Let them think that. The longer they underestimated me, the sweeter it would be when the truth came out. Because by now, I was being invited to the kind of luxury events they lived for, the ones they boasted about for months. And it was at one of those events, years later, where everything would come full circle in a way I couldn't have scripted better if I tried. But before that night came, there was one more move I had to make, the one that would ensure they'd never see it coming. The setup began without me even realizing it at first. Success had opened doors I didn't know existed, doors my parents and Ethan had spent years trying to keep shut in my face. Every high-profile project I completed led to new introductions, property developers, investors, event organizers, even a few local politicians. I wasn't just designing spaces anymore. I was building a network, one that reached into the very circles my family worshipped. It was during a private dinner hosted by one of my wealthiest clients, a sharp, silver-haired woman named Marianne, that I learned the piece of information that would change everything. Between courses, she leaned in and said, "Lucas, you should consider co-hosting next year's Coastal Heritage Gala. The right visibility could triple your client list." She said it casually, but I knew what that event was. It wasn't just any gala. It was the crown jewel of the social calendar in my hometown, the very same one my parents and Ethan treated like their personal stage. I kept my expression neutral, but inside, gears were turning. If I was on the hosting side of that event, it meant my name would be on the invitations, my face in the press, and my influence recognized publicly. And more importantly, it meant they would have to walk into a room where I wasn't the overlooked relative lingering by the buffet. I was the person they'd have to greet as an equal. I told Marianne I'd think about it, but the truth was I'd already decided. I started investing more into my public image, professional photo shoots, press interviews, and sponsorship deals that put my company's name in places my family couldn't ignore. I even secured a partnership with a luxury brand that supplied decor for some of the most exclusive events in the region. It was subtle, but the threads were weaving together. Meanwhile, I kept hearing bits and pieces about Ethan and Emily through mutual acquaintances. Their perfect facade had cracks, a business deal Ethan mishandled, a renovation project Emily started but never finished, rumors of financial strain despite their expensive vacations. My parents, of course, pretended everything was fine, still posting polished photos of family dinners and special celebrations. It was all image, no substance. I didn't interfere. Not yet. I wanted the contrast to be glaring when the moment came, their forced smiles against the reality of how far I'd risen. By the time the invitation to officially co-host the Coastal Heritage Gala arrived, my business was thriving on an international level. I'd opened a second office overseas, hired a PR team, and secured a client roster that included celebrities and CEOs. The gala committee welcomed me like I'd been part of their inner circle for years. They even gave me free rein over the event design, which meant every guest, including my parents, would be surrounded by my work from the moment they stepped through the door. The date was set. The venue was a historic ballroom overlooking the water, dripping with chandeliers and echoing with the kind of old-world prestige my family idolized. I signed the sponsorship papers, approved the guest list, and made sure my parents' names were right there, front and center. And just to twist the knife, I extended a personal invitation to Ethan and Emily, addressed formally from my office. No explanation, no personal note, just a gesture that would leave them wondering why I wanted them there. I had no intention of telling them beforehand who else would be standing beside me that night. That detail was going to be the part that made them freeze in place when they walked into the room. The night of the gala arrived with the kind of crisp, clear air that makes everything feel sharper. Sounds, colors, even the tension in the room. The ballroom glowed under golden light, the tables set with pristine linens, crystal glasses catching the flicker of hundreds of candles. Every flower arrangement, every archway, every elegant seating area had my company's signature style woven into it. My name was printed on the entrance banner alongside Mary Ann's, big enough for no one to miss. I arrived early, dressed in a deep navy tuxedo, greeting guests as they filtered in. My PR team moved discreetly through the crowd, making sure the photographers caught the right angles, the smiles, the handshakes, the subtle shots of my designs in the background. The plan wasn't to humiliate my parents or Ethan outright. It was to let the setting, the introductions, and my presence do all the work. And then they walked in. I spotted them at the entrance, my parents, Ethan and Emily. They looked the way they always did for events like this, perfectly styled, polished, and ready to charm. But the second their eyes landed on the banner, I saw it. The split-second pause, the flicker of disbelief. My mother's smile faltered just slightly. My father's hand hesitated before shaking the event coordinators. Ethan's jaw tightened. They tried to recover quickly, but I was already walking toward them, calm and steady. "Welcome," I said, my voice smooth. "I'm glad you could make it." For a moment, none of them said anything. Then my mom forced a smile. "Lucas, you're hosting this." "Co-hosting," I corrected, shaking Ethan's hand with a grip just firm enough to make him notice. "It's been a great project. I designed the space myself. Please, enjoy the evening. There's a lot to see." I didn't linger. That was part of the strategy. Never give them the satisfaction of thinking I needed their approval. Instead, I drifted back into the crowd, introducing myself to influential guests, making sure my parents could see me moving comfortably in a world they thought I'd never belong to. Every time I glanced their way, they were standing a little stiffer, their smiles a little tighter. The moment that sealed it came later in the night, during the charity auction. As co-host, I was invited on stage to say a few words about the cause. The spotlight hit me as I stepped up, the murmurs quieting. I thanked the guests for their generosity, spoke briefly about my company's contributions, and then, without ever mentioning them directly, I talked about how I'd built my business from the ground up, starting with nothing but determination and a vision. I could feel their eyes on me the entire time. When I stepped off the stage, Marianne greeted me with a smile and looped her arm through mine. "Come, I want to introduce you to some of our biggest donors." That was when I saw their faces change completely, because standing beside me, laughing easily, was the woman I'd married a year earlier. A woman they had never met. A woman whose elegance, confidence, and kindness radiated in a way that drew people in immediately. And just like that, they realized that the life they'd thought I could never have, the success, the influence, the love, was standing right in front of them, and I hadn't needed them for any of it. I didn't need to say a word. The revenge was already complete. For the rest of the evening, my parents moved through the ballroom like they were walking on glass. They kept their smiles plastered on, but every time they caught sight of me and my wife, Isabella, deep in conversation with the city's most influential guests, their expressions flickered. Ethan tried to mask his discomfort by over-engaging with anyone who would listen, but I noticed how few people actually knew who he was. In this room, he wasn't the center of attention. I was. Eventually, they approached us. My mother's voice was syrupy sweet, the way it always got when she was trying to save face. "Lucas, you didn't tell us you were married." Her eyes flicked to Isabella, assessing, searching for some imperfection she could pounce on. I smiled calm. "We've been married for over a year now." Isabella runs her own art consultancy. She works with clients all over the world. Isabella, ever gracious, offered her hand and greeted them warmly. My father muttered something about impressive work, while clearly trying to process that his son, the one he dismissed as a disappointment, had built a life that outshone the one they'd pushed him away from. Ethan finally spoke. "We had no idea you were doing all this." The way he said it, you could hear the quiet resentment under the surprise. I kept my tone even. "I know. That's because I didn't need to tell you." And I meant it. Every choice I'd made since that night years ago was mine, untainted by their control or approval. As the evening wound down, I noticed something almost poetic. My parents and Ethan no longer commanded the attention they used to. People gravitated toward Isabella and me, asking about my company, my projects, our travels. My parents had always wanted to be the most important people in the room, but now they were just another set of guests, standing on the sidelines of an event their son was hosting. When they finally left, my mother gave a stiff hug, my father a half-hearted handshake. Ethan didn't even attempt either. They walked out into the night, their postures rigid, their faces tight, and I knew the reality would sink in on the drive home. They had gambled on the wrong person, and they'd lost. As the last guest departed and the lights dimmed, I stood by the grand windows overlooking the water. Isabella came up beside me, slipping her hand into mine. "You okay?" she asked softly. I glanced at the emptying ballroom, at the space I'd created, at the life we'd built. "More than okay," I said. They finally saw me for who I really am, and for once, they couldn't do a thing about it. And with that, I turned away from the glass, leaving their world, and everything it once meant to me, behind for good. If there's one moment in my life that snapped me wide awake, it was the sound of a breadbasket scraping across a table. I don't mean metaphorically. I mean the actual, physical sound, ceramic against wood, wicker against linen, followed by the precise click of my stepdad's Rolex as he slid the bread away from me like I was some stray dog. I can still hear it. I can still smell the butter melting into that rosemary focaccia. And I can still remember how it felt to be 19, dressed in a button-down shirt I ironed myself, trying to look presentable for a dinner where I didn't matter. My name's Luke. I'm 23 now, but this happened 4 years ago. Back then, I had this naive belief that family dynamics could be repaired if you just tried hard enough. If you showed up, stayed polite, bit your tongue. That maybe, just maybe, love could win out over old resentments. That's the story I told myself when I accepted my mom's invitation to her big family dinner, celebrating my stepdad's promotion. She made it sound like a fresh start. "He's trying to be better," she told me over the phone. "The kids are excited to see you again. Come on, Luke. It'll mean a lot." The truth is, I hadn't been around much since I moved out. I got a scholarship and dipped the second I could. Not because I hated anyone, but because the walls in that house always felt like they were pressing in on me, like I was a guest overstaying my welcome. My stepdad, Rick, had 2 kids from a previous marriage, Blake and Madison, both a couple years younger than me. Picture the golden retriever son and Instagram princess archetypes, and that's them. Perfect smiles, expensive hobbies, praise from adults who never asked them to lift a finger. Me? I was Debbie's mistake. That's how Rick once referred to me when he thought I was out of earshot. I still remember that night. I was 14. My mom had remarried him the year before. I had just finished doing the dishes after everyone else went to the living room. Rick was in the kitchen pouring himself a scotch when his buddy on speaker asked how he liked being a family man again. Rick laughed, this deep, sharp bark of a laugh, and said, "Well, there's only so much you can do when you marry someone with baggage." I didn't cry. I didn't even tell my mom. I just started cleaning more quietly after that. Fast forward to this dinner. I remember standing outside the restaurant, this high-end steakhouse I definitely couldn't afford on my own, rehearsing my small talk. My mom was already inside when I arrived. Rick had rented out a private room for the occasion. When the hostess led me in, everyone was already seated. Blake and Madison waved like I was some vague acquaintance. Rick gave me a stiff nod. My mom looked tired. Not in the long day at work kind of way. More like she was bracing herself for impact. I slid into the empty chair at the end of the table, and that's when I realized no place setting had been laid out for me. No big deal, I thought. Maybe they just forgot. I flagged down the waiter with a polite smile and asked for a menu. He glanced at Rick, who gave the tiniest shake of his head, and said, "Oh, we're actually doing a preset dinner for the table tonight. But I'll bring you the menu in case." I opened it. Cheapest entree was $42, and that was the vegetarian option. Everyone else had already been served starters. Madison had some kind of seared tuna. Blake was halfway through his French onion soup, slurping obnoxiously while making a show of swirling his wine. Yes, wine. He was 17, but Rick had connections. Apparently, that included the ability to ignore drinking laws. I folded the menu shut and waited, and waited, and waited. 20 minutes in, the server brought out the next course. Lobster tails for Blake and Madison. Filet mignon for Rick and my mom. Still nothing for me. I cleared my throat gently. Rick looked over with this folk-infused expression. "Oh, did you want something, Luke?" "Ah, yeah. I thought we were all eating." He raised an eyebrow and gestured toward the untouched breadbasket at the center of the table. "There's only enough for family," he said. Then, slowly, deliberately, he slid the breadbasket away from me and placed it between Blake and Madison. My mom didn't say anything. She just stared down at her plate. I caught her eyes for a second. She whispered, barely audible, "Don't make this about you." That line, That was the crack. Not a break. Not an explosion. Just a crack in the dam. But it ran deep. I didn't say anything. Not right away. I just leaned back in my chair and nodded slowly. My heart was pounding, but I kept my face neutral. It's funny how sometimes pain doesn't register as pain. It registers as this weird, cold clarity, like your body stepping out of itself. Rick chuckled under his breath and turned back to his steak. Kids these days, he said to no one in particular, think they're entitled to everything. I watched them laugh. Eat. Toast. Like I was invisible. Like I wasn't even there. What they didn't know, what none of them realized, was that when I walked in earlier, I had opened a tab. The hostess had asked whose name to put it under, and I told her, almost as a reflex, Luke, I'll cover my end. And right then, sitting at that table, watching my mom avoid my gaze while my step-siblings giggled over something on Madison's phone, something clicked. A part of me that had been quiet for years finally stood up. I stood too, pulled out my wallet, walked straight to the front of the restaurant. The hostess blinked when she saw me. I'd like to cancel the tab I opened, I said, keeping my voice calm. She frowned. Is everything all right? I smiled. Oh, it's fine now. But could you do me a favor? I pointed to the private room. Table 7? Please let them know they've been removed from my guest list. And if they ask why, just say the host changed his mind. She looked startled. I could see the manager heading over, probably catching on from my tone. I didn't raise my voice, but I spoke loud enough for Table 7 to hear. Please escort Table 7 out. They're no longer my guests. Then I turned around, slowly, and made eye contact with Rick. That was the moment everything changed. But that's not where it began. Because that dinner? That was just the spark. You want to know what led up to that moment? The years of subtle jabs, the double standards, the careful erasure of anything that made me feel like a son? Buckle up. You're going to see how a lifetime of disrespect builds up like gasoline on dry grass. And how sometimes, all it takes is one flicker, one petty, perfect moment to light it all up. So let's go back. Not to the dinner. Let's go home. Let me take you back to when it all really started unraveling. Not that I saw it at the time. See, when you grow up walking on eggshells, you don't realize you're bleeding until someone else walks barefoot beside you and says, hey, this isn't normal. After the dinner incident, I didn't go no contact immediately. I didn't storm out and burn bridges. I wish I could say I was that brave back then. But I wasn't. What I did was what I always did. I went quiet. I went still. I waited for someone, anyone, to reach out and make things right. No one did. Not my mom. Not Rick. Certainly not Blake or Madison. A week went by before I got a text from my mom. Not a phone call. Just a text. You embarrassed me. Please don't do that again. That was it. No, how are you? No. I'm sorry you felt hurt. Just a plea not to rock the boat. A boat that had already been sailing without me for years. But fine. Let's rewind a little further to my final year of high school. That's where most of the tension really started showing its face, like mold creeping through the walls. I had just turned 17, and I was working part-time at a local bookstore. Nothing glamorous, but it helped me buy my own clothes, pitch in for gas, and, most importantly, avoid being home more than I needed to. Rick never said it outright, but there was this unspoken rule in the house. If you weren't Blake or Madison, you needed to be useful. I remember one particular afternoon. It was summer, and the house felt like it was holding its breath from the heat. Rick came into my room without knocking, looked around like he was evaluating the square footage, and said, "You're mowing the lawn today." I looked up from my desk. "I have a shift at 4. Then mow it before that," he said, already turning to leave. "No excuses." "But Blake's home," I said, careful with my tone. "Can't we alternate?" Rick stopped in the doorway. "Blake's got football conditioning. He needs his energy. He's literally watching YouTube in his room." I pointed out, instantly regretting it. Rick stepped back in. His voice dropped. "Don't talk back. You want to live in this house. You pitch in. You're not Blake." He didn't have to say more. He never did. So I mowed the lawn. Then I took a shower, burned my hand on the hot water Blake always hogged, and biked to work in a wrinkled uniform. Came home to find out Madison had friends over, and Rick had ordered them pizza. There were 6 boxes. Not a single slice left for me. Just an empty fridge, an ignored text to my mom, and a passive-aggressive note on the counter. "Next time, get home earlier if you want to eat." That was the rhythm of my teen years. Serve. Be useful. Be quiet. Be less. One Christmas stands out more than the rest. We were all gathered in the living room. Fireplace crackling. Mariah Carey blaring. Madison was opening her third gift, a brand new iPhone, latest model. Blake had just unwrapped a signed jersey and tickets to a playoff game. My mom kept cooing over them like they were toddlers. Rick handed them each envelopes stuffed with cash. Even the dog got a new bed. I waited patiently, watching the pile under the tree dwindle. Then my mom turned to me with a hesitant smile. "Oh, Luke, there's one more." She handed me a soft package. I opened it. It was a sweater. Not a designer one. Not even a nice one. Just a clearance rack sweater. Wrong size. Still had the price tag on, $15. "Thanks," I said, trying to sound grateful, my throat tight. Rick didn't even look at me. "You're a grown man now," he muttered, sipping his eggnog. "Don't expect handouts forever." Blake laughed and tossed a balled-up wrapper at my head. That night, while they all watched a movie, I locked myself in my room and stared at the sweater for a long time. I remember wondering if I was crazy for being upset. It's a sweater, right? Not a big deal. But it wasn't about the gift. It was the message, the hierarchy, the invisible wall they built and draped in polite conversation and holiday music. My mom came in later and sat on the edge of my bed. "You okay?" she asked, avoiding my eyes. "Yeah," I lied. "Just tired." She nodded slowly. "You know Rick means well. He's just set in his ways." I stayed silent. "You're strong, Luke. You've always been independent." That's the line she always fed me when I got the short end of the stick. "You're strong." As if that made it okay. As if being strong meant you didn't deserve affection. College was my ticket out. I got a scholarship for a state university a few hours away. It wasn't Ivy League, but it was mine. I packed up everything I owned into a beat-up Honda Civic I bought with bookstore money, and I left without any fanfare. Rick didn't help me move. My mom gave me a tepid hug. Blake and Madison didn't even say goodbye. The first semester was like breathing clean air for the first time. I made friends. I joined a film club. I started writing short stories. For once, I felt like I was more than a footnote in someone else's narrative. I'd call my mom every now and then. She'd update me on the family like I was an old coworker. Blake got MVP again. Madison's looking at colleges in California. Rick might get promoted this year. She never asked about my classes, or my writing, or the short film I directed that actually won second place in a local competition. I told her about it once, and she said, "That's cute. I bet Rick could give you some business tips to really turn that into something." Rick sold insurance. I was making art. But okay. The few times I came home for breaks, it was like stepping into a time capsule. Same hierarchy. Same passive digs. Same hollow smiles. One Thanksgiving, Blake made a joke about how I probably write poetry in a tree somewhere, and Rick laughed so hard he spilled gravy on his shirt. My mom just rolled her eyes. Madison made a snide comment about film majors being unemployed. I hadn't even told her my major. She must have stalked my Instagram. When I said I was thinking about starting a YouTube channel to post my short films, Rick scoffed. "Or you could get a real job." I left early the next morning. So when my mom called about the family dinner, "We want to celebrate Rick's promotion together," I should have known better. But a part of me still hoped. Still wanted to believe that maybe, just once, I could sit at the table and not feel like a ghost. Instead, Rick pulled the breadbasket away like I was some panhandler. My mom whispered, "Don't make this about you." And the last sliver of hope in me withered. What I didn't tell you earlier is what happened right after I canceled the tab and walked out of that restaurant. I didn't go home. I didn't cry in the car. I drove to a gas station, bought a Red Bull and a pack of gum, and just sat in the parking lot. Windows down. Breathing. I looked at my phone. No messages. No missed calls. They didn't follow me. They didn't care. That's when something shifted. I realized I didn't just want distance from them. I wanted justice. Not the loud, messy, shouting match kind. Not the social media rants or the screaming in parking lots. No, I wanted the kind of justice that leaves people stunned, that forces them to sit with what they've done, that turns the mirror on them and makes them finally see. It would take time. It would take patience. And it would start with something small, something they never saw coming. I didn't know it then, sitting in that parked car with my hands clenched around a melting energy drink, but I had already started planning it. Not revenge exactly. Not yet. But the setup. The slow, deliberate unraveling of the narrative they built around themselves. And believe me, it was going to hurt. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely comes all at once. It's not a tidal wave, it's a slow leak. Drip by drip, your trust drains out of the bottom until one day you look down and realize the floor's rotted through. After the dinner, I went dark. No calls, no texts. I muted my mom's number and turned off notifications for the family group chat. Not that anyone ever used it unless they needed something. It wasn't a formal no-contact situation. I just needed space. Air. Room to finally hear my own thoughts without their voices echoing in my head. The months that followed were some of the most productive I'd ever had. I poured myself into school, got a part-time gig doing freelance video editing, picked up a few clients, and started producing real work I could be proud of. One of my short films even got selected for a regional student festival. Small, sure, but it felt like my life was finally becoming mine. No breadcrumbs, no backhanded compliments, just my own damn table. But I should have known peace was temporary with them. It was mid-April when the first message slipped through. I was in the campus library editing a scene when my phone buzzed with a name I hadn't seen in months. Mom. Hey, can we talk? It's important. Just 6 words. That was all it took to make my stomach twist. I didn't reply right away. I sat there, staring at the screen, trying to decide if important meant someone was dying or if it just meant Rick wanted to force another awkward dinner. 15 minutes passed before she texted again. It's about your grandfather. That made me pause. Grandpa Henry, my mom's dad, was one of the few relatives who ever treated me like an actual person. A retired mechanic with thick hands and a soft voice. He used to sneak me $20 bills when Rick wasn't looking and say, "Don't let him tell you who you are, kid." He wasn't rich, but he had a house in rural Pennsylvania, a vintage Harley in the garage, and a library of old records that smelled like cedar and vinyl. We used to sit on his porch during summers while he told me stories about how he built his first car from scraps in the 60s. He was my escape hatch from everything Rick represented. So I called. "Luke," my mom answered, voice flat. "Your grandfather had a stroke." The world tilted a little. "Is he okay?" I asked, sitting up. "He's stable," she said quickly, as if rehearsed. "But he's in rehab. It's going to be a long recovery." I ran my hand down my face. "Why didn't anyone tell me sooner?" "Well," she hesitated, "we weren't sure how to reach you. You've been distant." I clenched my jaw. "I live in the same place. My number hasn't changed." She ignored that. "We're handling everything for now. But I thought you should know. I wanted to see him. I said I'd drive up that weekend." She paused before saying, "That's not really necessary. He's still disoriented. Doesn't recognize many people." Didn't recognize people? That didn't sound like the grandfather I knew. But maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't the right time. I asked her to keep me updated. She said she would. We hung up. But something didn't sit right. So a week later, I drove up anyway. It took me 6 hours. I called the rehab center ahead of time, explained who I was, and asked if I could visit. They were hesitant at first, but agreed after I confirmed I was listed as a family contact on his file. That's when the first red flag waved. "He doesn't get many visitors," the nurse said. I blinked. "My mom hasn't come?" "She was here once. The day he arrived. Once. In 2 weeks." I walked into his room expecting the worst. Tubes, machines, vacant eyes. But there he was. Frail, yes. Thinner. But alert. Awake. And when he saw me, he smiled. "Lukey," he rasped, voice weak but familiar. "There's my boy." I sat by his bedside and took his hand. We talked for an hour. He asked about school, about my videos, about whether I'd finally found someone who doesn't talk down to you. He was lucid, sharp. The stroke had slowed his speech, but not his mind. "Where's your mom?" he asked. I hesitated. "She said you wouldn't recognize me." His brow furrowed. Why would she say that? I didn't have an answer, and he didn't need one. We just sat there in silence for a moment, the kind that says more than any words can. Then he dropped the bomb. "They're trying to sell my house." My blood ran cold. "What?" He nodded slowly. Said it's too much upkeep. Said they'd move me into assisted living and use the money for expenses. I told them no, but then they stopped visiting. Figured I wasn't cooperating. I stared at him, trying to process it. "Did you sign anything?" "Not yet," he said, "but they keep sending papers." I swallowed hard. "Can I see them?" He motioned toward the drawer by his bed. I opened it and pulled out a folder filled with documents. Power of attorney requests, medical proxies, property transfer forms, all with my mom's name and Rick's typed neatly at the bottom. Unfiled and signed. I wanted to scream. Instead, I photographed every page. Every single one. I don't want them touching my house, he whispered. I built it. It's mine. I won't let them, I said quietly. I promise. When I left that day, I didn't just drive home. I went straight to the county clerk's office. Turns out, they'd already filed for temporary guardianship. My mom and Rick, claiming that Grandpa was mentally unfit to make decisions regarding his estate. The court date was scheduled for the following Monday. No one told me. They didn't expect me to know. They figured I'd stay silent like I always had. But not this time. That weekend, I gathered everything. Medical records from the rehab center, signed letters from Grandpa's doctor confirming he was competent, video clips I'd recorded with Grandpa's permission. I even brought a short letter Grandpa had written me back in high school, still in my dorm drawer, just to prove our bond. I showed up to the court date unannounced. My mom looked like she'd seen a ghost when I walked through the doors. Rick's smug expression faltered for the first time I'd ever seen. Madison and Blake weren't there, too busy living their golden child lives, I guess. I won't get into all the legal details, but I will say this. The judge was not impressed with what they tried to pull, especially after I laid out every piece of evidence showing Grandpa's clarity of mind. And after I read aloud one of the lines from their petition that said Grandpa had no meaningful connection to any other family. The judge paused, looked at them, then looked at me. You're his grandson? She asked. Yes, Your Honor. Have you been in contact with him? I visited him last week. We talk. He remembers me. I can prove it. I played a 20-second clip on my phone. Grandpa, smiling, calling me my boy, and laughing at one of my dumb jokes. The room went silent. Temporary guardianship? Denied. My mom didn't even look at me as she left the courtroom. Rick brushed past me like I was air. But I didn't care. Because Grandpa was safe. His house was safe. His voice was heard. Still, something inside me shattered that day. It wasn't just betrayal. It was erasure. They tried to erase him. His choices. His dignity. And they tried to erase me by cutting me out of the loop, by assuming I'd never show, never fight, never matter. They were wrong. That day, I realized something brutal and liberating all at once. This wasn't a family. It was a machine. And I'd been a cog in it for too long. So I started planning. Not just to protect Grandpa. That part was done. But to show them, once and for all, that you can't keep stepping on someone without eventually triggering a landmine. The best part? They had no idea what was coming next. After the court date, I didn't feel victorious. I thought I would. I thought proving them wrong in front of a judge, defending my grandfather, protecting his house, would finally be the moment I rose above everything. But instead, I walked out of that courtroom and felt hollow. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't the end. It wasn't even the climax. It was just another turn in the maze. Another layer of rot peeled back to reveal more underneath. I went back to campus, kept my head down, finished the semester. I didn't hear from my mom. Not even a one-line text to say, you didn't have to do that. No passive-aggressive emoji. Nothing. A month later, I got a letter from her. Not a text. Not a call. A letter. 3 pages long. Sloppy handwriting. I kept it in a drawer for weeks before finally opening it. The first line read, Luke, I don't know who you are anymore. Not how are you. Not why did you do it. Just immediate guilt. She went on about how I embarrassed her, how I put on a performance at court, how Rick's career could have been affected if certain people had been there to witness it. She talked about her stress, her sacrifices, her embarrassment. She said Grandpa was confused, that I exploited him in a moment of weakness, that he was easily manipulated and would say anything to feel loved. She ended the letter with, this family has tried with you. You need to ask yourself why you're always the problem. That sentence hit me harder than anything Rick ever said. Because it wasn't just cruel, it was a rewrite of reality. An erasure. Like my pain was just a phase. Like the problem wasn't what they did. It was that I refused to forget it. I didn't respond. I couldn't. There was nothing to say to someone who believed that my love for my grandfather was an act of manipulation. That summer was quiet. I stayed in town instead of going home. Picked up more editing work. Worked late nights. Ate a lot of microwave ramen and granola bars. I'd call Grandpa twice a week. We'd talk about everything except them. Then, sometime in July, I got a call from my old high school guidance counselor, of all people, Mrs. Romero. I hadn't spoken to her since graduation. She'd always been kind to me, One of the only adults who noticed when I was walking through school like a ghost. "Luke," she said after the usual pleasantries, "I hope this isn't intrusive, but I got a strange call from your mother last week." My heart skipped. "About what?" "She said you were in crisis, that you'd been making unsettling videos and isolating yourself. She asked me to recommend a therapist who could perform an evaluation for a possible conservatorship." I went silent. "She mentioned your grandfather's situation," Mrs. Romero added carefully, "but it didn't make sense. I've seen your work online, Luke. You're not unstable. You're thriving." I swallowed hard. "She asked me not to tell you," she said, "but I thought you should know." That was the lowest moment. Not the courtroom, not the Christmas sweater, not even the breadbasket. This quiet, secret campaign to make me seem unwell. This narrative that I was mentally unstable, just like they tried to paint Grandpa, because I refused to roll over and play dead. They weren't just cutting me out. They were discrediting me, undermining my reputation, whispering lies behind closed doors, building a safety net in case I ever spoke up again. If I ever went public, if I ever did something that made them look bad, they were preparing a fallback. "Luke's not well. You can't trust him." I wish I could say I screamed, raged, tore my room apart, but I didn't. I just sat there, still, quiet, numb. And that's when the planning really started. Because when you hit rock bottom, you get to decide what to do with the rubble. I started pulling every string I had. I talked to Grandpa's lawyer, found out my mom had quietly tried to list his house with a realtor weeks before the court hearing. The paperwork was halted because of my intervention, but the intent was there. The fraud was there. I started building a timeline. I gathered text messages, emails, documents, printed out screenshots, created a private cloud folder labeled Sundown. Not for revenge, not yet. Just to preserve, to prove that I wasn't crazy, that there was a pattern, a strategy, a motive. I also started digging into Rick's finances. Nothing invasive, just public records. Turns out he had some skeletons. A tax lien from 2012, a bankruptcy from his first marriage, a history of employment gaps hidden behind corporate-sounding LLCs. But the real gold mine came when I found out he had been using Grandpa's house address on certain paperwork. Insurance, credit checks, a few minor filings. Enough to raise questions. Enough to imply residency. Which was strange, because Rick had never spent a single night under that roof. Grandpa hadn't even known. It wasn't just unethical. It was criminal. Still, I didn't act. Not yet. I wanted to be thorough. I wanted to be careful. I knew how easy it would be for them to twist things, to spin the narrative. Poor Rick and Debbie, just trying to care for their struggling relative and their troubled son. I wasn't going to give them that. So I did what I'd always done best. I stayed quiet, played the background, pretended to move on. When the fall semester started, I returned to school like normal, smiled at my professors, edited videos, attended screenings, even dated someone casually for a few months. But behind the scenes, I was watching, and what I saw made everything worse. Rick had gotten a new job, a higher title, more visibility. He'd become the face of a community leadership initiative, giving talks at local events, mentoring kids, donating to veterans' charities. The public loved him, and my mom. She was the image of the doting wife. Hair always done, smile always ready, talking about how they gave up so much for their children, always paying it forward. There were articles, videos, social media posts, a whole online footprint curated to show them as heroes. And every single one of those smiling photos made me sick, because I knew what happened behind the scenes. I lived it. They weren't heroes. They were architects of a lie. And eventually, inevitably, lies collapse, especially when you start pulling at the corners. So that's what I did. Not all at once. Slowly, quietly, strategically. And when I finally lit the match, I made sure the whole structure would burn. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Because before the fire, before the explosion, before the public fallout, there was one more betrayal. One more knife in the back. The kind that makes you question whether love was ever real at all. And it came from the person I least expected. But I'll get to that soon. Because that's when things stopped being just personal and became war. It's strange how power doesn't arrive with a trumpet or a spotlight. It creeps in like morning light, subtle, quiet, almost unnoticeable until you look around and realize the room is no longer dark. After rock bottom, I didn't rise with a roar. I rose with intention. Slowly, methodically, like someone rebuilding a house with better materials, taking extra care to reinforce every corner that had once caved under pressure. This wasn't about revenge, at least not yet. It was about reclaiming control. And so, I started with the one thing I always had, my work. School became my sanctuary. I dove headfirst into editing gigs, student film festivals, short documentaries. Anything that gave me the chance to tell stories, my way. I learned to be sharper, cleaner, more professional. I didn't just want to be good. I wanted to be undeniable. Because if there's one thing Rick and my mom always relied on, it was the idea that I needed them. That I'd always be one bad month away from crawling back. They were wrong. By spring, I was producing a mini-series for a local nonprofit about underrepresented youth in media. One of my projects got picked up by a regional news site. Then a niche streaming platform reached out to license a few episodes for their Emerging Voices section. It wasn't Hollywood money, but it was real. And it meant I could finally stop living paycheck to paycheck. I upgraded from microwave ramen to actual groceries. Bought a used Sony A7 III off eBay. Learned to cook meals that didn't involve boiling water. Got a part-time internship at a studio that did post-production work for independent films. Started saving, investing, building. Meanwhile, Grandpa was thriving too. We moved him out of the rehab facility and into a cozy assisted living apartment with on-site medical staff and a small garage for his old Harley. I visited him every other week, brought takeout and showed him my latest projects. We'd eat on his little balcony and talk about life, his stories, my dreams, the irony of growing up in a family that didn't see us until we stopped playing their game. They only notice you, he said one afternoon, when you stop asking for scraps. That line stuck with me, because he was right. I hadn't heard a peep from my mom or Rick since the court date. Madison occasionally posted pictures of luxury vacations on Instagram, ski trips, rooftop brunches, some wellness retreat in Arizona. Blake got a tattoo of a lion and started calling himself a sales entrepreneur. Neither of them mentioned Grandpa. Not once. I wasn't just forgotten. I was written out. And honestly, that used to hurt. But now, it gave me leverage. Because while they curated their perfect lives online, I was building receipts. Quietly collecting everything they'd said, everything they'd signed, every contradiction between the image they sold and the truth they buried. And then, the timing snapped into place. It started with a podcast. One of my professors knew a journalist from a popular investigative podcast. Think serial-level popularity, but focused on ethical scandals involving public figures. She was looking to do a limited series on families who weaponized legal systems to control inheritance, power of attorney, and property ownership. My professor thought of me. I wasn't sure at first. I didn't want to air dirty laundry. I wasn't in it for the drama. But then I remembered Rick standing at that courtroom, smirking while my mother averted her eyes. I remembered that letter, telling me I was always the problem. I remembered Christmas, the breadbasket, the lawnmower. I emailed the journalist. We talked. I showed her the court filings, the guardianship petition, the house paperwork, the financial documents Rick had submitted using Grandpa's address. I played the audio clip of my mom telling me, "Don't make this about you." I even included copies of the realtor agreements they tried to sneak past Grandpa. She didn't just listen. She was horrified. 2 weeks later, I got a message. "We're greenlighting your episode. You'll be featured in episode 3. We'll protect your name if you prefer." I said no. I wanted my name on it. Not for fame. For the record. The episode dropped 6 weeks later. And everything changed. It started with a ripple, a few retweets, some sympathetic DMs, comments calling out the manipulation, the gaslighting, the betrayal. But then the ripple turned into a wave. Because someone, probably a coworker, recognized Rick's voice in one of the hidden recordings. You could clearly hear him on the podcast saying, "There's no way he'll fight this. He's weak. He's always been weak." Talking about Grandpa, dismissing him like he was a burden to be moved around like furniture. That clip went viral. The internet didn't hold back. Manipulative snake. Stealing from an old man? Really? This guy has a job mentoring kids? Rick's entire pillar of the community act started to crumble overnight. Local news picked up the story. His company suspended him pending an internal investigation. One of the veterans groups he worked with publicly distanced themselves. A community board he chaired asked him to resign. I didn't even have to lift a finger. It was beautiful. My mom, to her credit, didn't make a statement. But she changed her Facebook profile picture to a black square for a week. Subtle, like a silent protest. Or a tantrum. Madison tried to post a story defending them. Said, "It's easy to twist words when you're bitter," and called the podcast fake news. It backfired instantly. Her comments lit up with screenshots, court records, and quotes from the episode. She deleted it an hour later. Blake stayed quiet. I think, for the first time in his life, he realized there wasn't a joke to make. And me? I didn't say a word publicly. Not on Twitter. Not on Instagram. Not even on Reddit. I let the truth speak for itself. Instead, I doubled down on my work. The exposure from the podcast landed me new clients. A filmmaker from LA reached out for editing help on a documentary. I got flown out for a weekend shoot. Got paid more than I'd made in an entire semester. People were asking for me. For my voice. My eye. My story. I upgraded my gear. Got a better apartment. Started writing a script based loosely on everything that happened. Not a documentary. A story. Fictionalized. Poetic. But real in the ways that matter. And through it all, I stayed close to Grandpa. He started calling me his partner in crime. We'd laugh about that night at the restaurant sometimes. How Rick's face looked when I said, "They're no longer my guests." Grandpa said it was the first time in years he felt like someone had stood up for him. "You didn't just save my house," he told me. "You saved me." I'm not going to lie, that broke me a little. Because after everything, after all the manipulation and silence and betrayal, that moment reminded me why I did any of it in the first place. Not for payback, but for love. Still, part of me couldn't rest. Not yet. Because there was one more thing I needed to do. Not for Grandpa. Not even for me. But for the kid I used to be. The one who stood in the kitchen scrubbing plates while Rick called him baggage. The one who watched his step-siblings get steak and lobster while he was told to be grateful for bread. That kid deserved closure. And it was time to give it to him. So I planned one final move. Careful. Calculated. Poetic. You'll see. Some revenge stories start with a bang. Mine started with a wedding invitation. It came in a heavy cream envelope, gold-trimmed, with cursive lettering that practically screamed, "Look at how successful we are." Madison was getting married. Apparently to some finance guy named Grant, the kind of guy who says things like crushing Q3 and calls vacations recharging retreats. The invitation didn't come directly from her, of course. It came from my mom. No note. No phone call. Just the invite. Like a corporate memo. As if everything that had happened, Grandpa's house, the court case, the podcast, had just been a scheduling conflict we could now move past. It was being held at this luxury winery about an hour from the city. Black tie only. Adults only. No plus ones unless approved by the bride. I stared at the RSVP card for a long time. Then I tucked it into a drawer and forgot about it. Until Grandpa brought it up. "Madison's wedding, huh?" he said over lunch one Sunday, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Got the invite. You going?" "I don't know." He took a sip of lemonade. "Because if you are, I think I've got something you'll want to bring." That's when he pulled out a flash drive. "What's this?" "Security footage," he said casually. "From the garage." "The garage." He nodded. "From last year. Remember when Rick said he dropped by to check on the water heater?" I thought that was odd, so I installed the camera. Forgot all about it. I plugged the drive into my laptop later that night. What I saw made my jaw clench. There was Rick, in broad daylight, walking into Grandpa's garage with a clipboard and a realtor. Pointing around. Smiling. Opening cabinets. Talking like he owned the place. And then, clear as day, Rick saying, "We'll need to list it under my LLC for now. The paperwork's just a formality." It wasn't just shady. It was criminal. Attempted fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized access. Enough to open an investigation. And enough to permanently sever whatever fragile social image Rick had left. But I didn't go to the police. Not yet. I had a better idea. Because the wedding? That was my stage. And I'd been preparing for this performance my whole life. The day of the wedding arrived, warm and cloudless. Everyone at that winery was dressed like they were starring in a Vogue spread. Lace gowns. Designer tuxes. The kind of place where the valet judges you by the year of your car. I wore a tailored navy suit. Nothing flashy, but sharp enough to stand out without making noise. I brought a +1, my friend Jess, a fellow filmmaker with a sharp tongue and a sharper camera. She wasn't approved by the bride. We walked right in anyway. No one stopped us. The ceremony was all roses and violin quartets. Madison looked stunning, I'll admit that. Rick walked her down the aisle with the air of a man who thought he deserved applause. My mom cried gently, dabbing her mascara like she was in a Hallmark movie. And me? I waited through the vows, the kiss, the champagne toast, the first dance. Then came the reception. Tables lined with candles and gold-accented name cards. Assigned seating, of course. I was at table 12. Far corner. No microphone access. Practically in the parking lot. Classic. But Jess? Jess wandered. Mingled. Filming a behind-the-scenes wedding reel. She told anyone who asked. They all assumed she was hired by the couple. No one questioned the camera. At 8:45 p.m., just before the speeches, I made my move. I walked to the DJ booth. Slipped the DJ a flash drive. "It's a short tribute video for the bride," I said with a smile. Rick said to cue it before the father of the bride's speech. The DJ hesitated. "Did the couple approve it?" "Absolutely," I lied. He nodded and added it to the queue. 10 minutes later, the music cut. The lights dimmed. And the screen behind the dance floor flickered to life. At first, it was what everyone expected. A soft piano track, baby photos of Madison, family portraits, a cheesy graduation picture where Rick beamed like a proud dad. But then, the audio changed. Rick's voice. "We'll need to list it under my LLC for now. The paperwork's just a formality." Silence. Then the video zoomed in. A timestamp. A slow-motion shot of Rick opening Grandpa's cabinets, gesturing toward them like inventory. Pausing. Smiling. Lying. The footage spoke for itself. People gasped. Murmurs rippled through the room. Madison froze mid-sip. My mom went sheet white. The video ended with one simple line. "Some things shouldn't be swept under the rug, even at a wedding." Then the screen went black. Rick stood slowly. Tried to speak. That video is. But it was too late. The DJ cut the mic. The damage was done. What followed was chaos. The bride stormed out. The groom's family demanded explanations. Guests started filming. One of Madison's bridesmaids actually threw her bouquet at Rick. My mom, flustered, chased after her daughter, stilettos clacking like a metronome of panic. And me? I walked out with Jess. Calm, quiet, satisfied. The fallout was immediate. Within 24 hours, the clip had been uploaded to a wedding gossip subreddit and was trending under #WineryWeddingDrama. Someone recognized Rick. Someone else tagged his company. By the end of the week, he'd been let go due to ongoing internal matters. Sponsors pulled out. Madison deactivated her Instagram. I got a call from my mom 2 days later. I didn't answer. She left a voicemail. "I hope you're happy." I was. Not because I destroyed anything, but because I finally revealed it. You see, revenge isn't about rage. It's about truth. And sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is shine a light. A month after the wedding, the world moved on, but they didn't. Rick's name had become a local punchline. The podcast that exposed him saw a surge in listens, and follow-up episodes were made exploring the wedding sabotage heard around the Tri-County. Reddit sleuths found more connections. How Rick tried to leverage Grandpa's address for small business loans, how he exaggerated military service on a community grant form, even how he used fake references to land one of his jobs. The man had built his life on a patchwork of lies, and I had simply pulled the thread. He moved out of state not long after. Some whispered Florida. Others said Arizona. Either way, he disappeared without ceremony. No farewell party. No redemption arc. Just a man who spent decades trying to control every room he walked into, now ducking behind curtains. As for Madison, the wedding was annulled within 2 weeks. Turns out Grant's family hadn't taken kindly to being publicly humiliated, especially after discovering the full scope of Rick's legal baggage. Apparently, Grant's father had a reputation to protect. The marriage was over before the thank you cards were even printed. My mom called once more after that. No voicemail. Just a missed call at 2:13 a.m. I didn't call back. Because the truth is, I didn't hate her. Not even after everything. But I didn't trust her either. And love without trust? That's just nostalgia with a leash. I saw her once more, actually. 6 months later, at Grandpa's 80th birthday. She showed up late. Brought a store-bought cake and a quiet apology wrapped in small talk. I shook her hand. Said thank you. Didn't invite her to stay. That was the last time I saw her. She didn't fight it. Because by then, she knew. I was no longer the kid begging for scraps at the table. I was the table now. I had built my own. With people who cared. With work that fulfilled me. With a life that finally belonged to me. Grandpa, by the way, is doing great. We co-signed a deal last year to turn his property into a local arts retreat for underprivileged youth. The same kind of kids who never got a seat at the table either. He still calls me partner in crime. Still tries to sneak me cash when I pay for dinner. I let him do it sometimes, just to see him smile. I graduated with honors, started my own small production company, and landed a deal with a media studio to adapt my story into a feature script. It's not going to be a revenge thriller. It's going to be about family, about identity, about the quiet strength it takes to walk away and still keep your soul intact. And I'll say this, just once, for the record. If they had just given me a seat, if they had just passed the breadbasket, I would have shared it. But they didn't. And I'm done waiting. So I built my own table. And now I eat in peace. I'm Aaron, 27, and if you asked anyone in my family who the successful son was, they'd point to my brother, Evan, without hesitation. Growing up, it wasn't even subtle. Dad practically had Evan on a pedestal. Every family dinner, every holiday, every random Tuesday, he'd find a way to work Evan's name into the conversation. Evan just got another promotion. Evan's boss said he's management material. Evan really has the discipline his brother never had. His brother, me, the invisible one in the background, apparently born to make Evan look even shinier. Mom would sometimes try to smooth things over, saying things like, "Your dad just wants what's best for you." But even she couldn't deny that Dad's favoritism had turned into something uglier over the years. It wasn't just about pride anymore. It was about ego. He wanted a trophy son, someone he could brag about to his colleagues, the golf buddies, or that group of business owners he used to drink with after work. Evan was that trophy. I, on the other hand, was the reminder that not every investment pays off. See, Evan took the safe path, went to college, got a degree in finance, landed a job at Dad's company, and climbed the ladder with Dad holding the bottom rung steady. I tried to carve out something different. I wasn't built for spreadsheets and office politics. I liked creating things, starting with nothing and turning it into something people wanted. When I was 21, I used my savings and a small loan to start a local print shop. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. I remember walking into the kitchen one night after registering the business, excited, ready to tell my parents. I thought, just for once, maybe Dad would be proud of me for taking initiative. He didn't even look up from his tablet. "A print shop? You mean like posters and t-shirts?" he said, almost laughing. "That's not a business, Aaron. That's a hobby. You'll be out of money in 6 months." Mom gave me that sympathetic look, the one that tried to comfort but only made me feel smaller. Evan smirked over his plate and said, "You should have just joined Dad's company. You could have had a stable job instead of playing entrepreneur." That word, playing, stuck with me. Like my efforts were just a child's game compared to their corporate lives. The early months were brutal. I barely slept, handling everything from printing to deliveries to late-night accounting. But slowly, it started to grow. I landed a few local clients, then a couple of schools, and eventually a regional sports league that wanted jerseys and banners. Every milestone, I wanted to tell my dad. Every time, I didn't, because I already knew how the conversation would go. 2 years in, I got my first big order, a contract worth more than my dad's annual salary when he first started his company. When I tried to share the news during a family barbecue, Dad cut me off mid-sentence to brag about Evan's new company car. "That's what happens when you work hard," he said, clapping Evan on the back. "You get rewarded." Then, turning to me, he added, "You listening, Aaron? Hard work pays off. Not gambling on pipe dreams." It wasn't just words. He actively sabotaged me in small ways. When I asked if I could print flyers for his company at a discounted rate, thinking maybe I could finally contribute something to the family business, he laughed and said, "We use professionals, Aaron. Real printing services. Not your operation." That one stung. Not because of the money, but because it told me exactly what he thought I was worth. Still, I pushed through. I stopped trying to earn his approval and started working for myself. Over the next few years, I expanded my business online, opened 2 more locations, and began offering branding services. My small shop had turned into a legitimate company with full-time employees. But none of that mattered to Dad. At every family event, he'd make those little digs. "So, still running your little t-shirt stand?" Or, "You'd be making real money if you just joined your brother's company." And then came the dinner, the one that changed how I saw everything. It was my mom's birthday, and the whole family gathered at her favorite restaurant. I'd just signed a partnership with a national retail chain, my biggest win yet, and I was debating whether to share it. For once, I wanted to celebrate something too. But before I could open my mouth, Dad raised his glass and said, "A toast to Evan, the pride of our family. His department just hit record profits." Everyone clapped. I didn't. Mom glanced at me, maybe noticing how tight my jaw was, but said nothing. Then Evan leaned over and whispered, "You should start selling those shirts at a discount, little bro. Maybe then you'll catch up." I forced a laugh, but inside, I felt something snap, a quiet, simmering anger that had been building for years. After dinner, I finally tried to talk to Dad privately in the parking lot. I told him I was tired of being compared, tired of being treated like my achievements didn't matter. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "Aaron, this isn't about comparison. It's about reality. You chose a path that leads nowhere. You'll never make it on your own." Not really. Then, with a smirk, he added, "But hey, maybe Evan can find you a spot at the company if things go south." That was the moment I stopped trying. Over the next few months, I distanced myself. No more family dinners, no more calls. I focused on my business. The market was changing fast, and while my dad's company was struggling to adapt, mine was growing. I saw it happening in slow motion. Their outdated strategies, their refusal to modernize, their growing debts. I heard things through the grapevine, whispers about layoffs, delayed payments, missed contracts. Dad brushed it off whenever someone mentioned it, saying it was just a rough patch. But I knew better. Then one day, Evan showed up at my office. I hadn't seen him in months. He was wearing that same tailored suit and self-satisfied grin. "Hey, little bro," he said, like we were best friends. "Dad's been having some cash flow problems. Figured I'd see if you'd be willing to, help out a bit. Maybe loan the company some funds." I couldn't believe it. After all the years of mockery, they were coming to me. I played it cool, though. I told him I'd think about it. Inside, I felt something I hadn't felt in years, leverage. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying Dad's words in my head. "You'll never make it on your own." And yet here we were. A week later, I got the call. My dad's company, the one he built, the one he used to measure my worth, had officially filed for bankruptcy. But that's not where this story ends. Not even close. Because when the dust settled and the assets went up for auction, I saw an opportunity. A poetic one. And let's just say, I took it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Before that moment, before the auction, before the signatures, before the look on my father's face when he realized what I'd done, something happened that changed everything. Something that pushed me from quiet resentment to cold, deliberate revenge. It started with a phone call. One I'll never forget. When that call came in, I was sitting in my office, going over the latest quarterly numbers. Business was booming, better than I'd ever dreamed. We'd just landed another major contract, and for the first time in my life, I felt secure. Not just financially, but emotionally. Like maybe I'd finally built something that could stand tall without anyone's approval. My assistant buzzed me and said, "Aaron, there's a call for you. It's your father." For a moment, I just stared at the phone. My father hadn't called me directly in nearly a year. We'd exchanged a few strained messages through my mother, polite, meaningless updates. But an actual call? That was new. I told her to put him through, part of me curious, part of me already bracing for whatever reason he had. When I heard his voice, it sounded smaller somehow. Forced confidence covering something weaker. "Aaron," he said, clearing his throat. "It's been a while." "Yeah," I said. "It has." He paused, probably waiting for me to fill the silence, but I didn't. He finally continued. "Listen, your mother told me you've been doing well. That your, print business is doing okay." "Better than okay," I said. "It's growing." There was another pause. Then he laughed, that same half-condescending chuckle I'd grown up hearing. "Well, that's good. That's good, son. I'm glad things are steady for you." It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like, steady was the best compliment he could muster. Like I'd reached some modest level of competence that he could politely acknowledge without admitting he'd been wrong all these years. But then his tone shifted. "Actually," he said, "I wanted to talk to you about something. You probably heard we've been going through a rough period at the company." I leaned back in my chair, already knowing where this was going. "Evan mentioned it," I said carefully. He sighed. "Yeah, well, it's been difficult. The economy's not what it used to be, and we had some unexpected losses." Nothing we can't recover from, of course. But, we might need some temporary support. There it was. The ask. Support. I repeated. Financial, he said, with forced casualness. Just a short-term loan. You know, family helping family. We've done well for you over the years, and I figured. I cut him off. Done well for me. That hung in the air for a second. He tried to recover, fumbling for words. I mean, we raised you, didn't we? Gave you opportunities, supported your ventures. I could almost see his face through the phone, trying to mask irritation with authority. You never supported my business, I said quietly. You laughed at it. He exhaled through his nose, impatient. Aaron, I don't want to rehash old arguments. The point is, we're in a situation where we could use some liquidity. Just a few $100,000. I know you've done well, and I interrupted again. You think I'm just going to give you money after the way you've treated me? There was a long silence. When he spoke again, his voice had a hint of that old edge, the one that said he was used to being obeyed. You're still my son, Aaron. I'm asking you to step up for the family. Don't make this about pride. I almost laughed at the irony. Pride. I told him I'd think about it, and hung up. But I didn't think about it, not really. I thought about the years of dismissal, the lectures about how real success only came through his company, the smirks, the mockery. And now he needed me. That night, Mom called. Her voice was gentler, but it carried the same undertone. Honey, your father's very stressed. Things haven't been easy at work. It would mean a lot if you could help out. I asked her, do you even know how much he's asking for? There was a pause. Not exactly. But he said you're doing well, and I sighed. Mom, I love you, but you both made it clear a long time ago that I wasn't part of that company. Why is it my responsibility now that things are falling apart? She went quiet for a while. When she spoke again, she sounded almost sad. Because you're family, Aaron, and family should be there for each other. Family. That word always sounded hollow when it came from her. Because when I needed them, when I was struggling to make rent in those early months, when I needed someone to believe in me, they weren't there. Family only seemed to matter when it was convenient for them. I didn't give them an answer that night. I told her I'd call back in a few days. But in those few days, things got even uglier. Evan started showing up at my office more frequently. First, he pretended it was just to catch up. He'd walk in, compliment the space, make small talk, and then slide into conversation about the company. You know, Dad's been under a lot of pressure lately, he'd say, leaning against my desk. He's not sleeping much. You could really take some weight off his shoulders if you stepped in. I'd shrug, keep my tone neutral. Maybe, but that's not really my problem, is it? He'd flash that fake brotherly grin, the one that never reached his eyes. Come on, Aaron. Don't be petty. This is Dad we're talking about. He's done everything for us. Everything for you. I corrected. He laughed, like I'd just told a harmless joke. You've got to let go of this resentment, man. It's not healthy. Look, once things stabilize, we can even find you a position. Maybe in marketing. You've got that creative touch. I stared at him. You're offering me a job? At Dad's company. Why not? It's time you joined the real world. That was the moment I realized they still didn't see it. They didn't see me as someone who'd built something real, someone who didn't need their approval anymore. They still saw the same Aaron they could talk down to, the one who'd always been the lesser son. A few weeks passed, and the requests turned into pressure. My mom called again. Then my uncle. Even one of Dad's old business partners reached out, saying he'd heard I was being stubborn. Apparently, Dad had been telling people I was refusing to help out of spite. It was humiliating, not because I cared what they thought, but because it showed how easily my father twisted the story to protect his pride. To him, admitting he needed me, his failure of a son, was unthinkable. So instead, he painted me as the selfish one. Then one afternoon, I stopped by my parents' house unannounced. I hadn't planned to. I was just driving by and decided I wanted answers. Dad was in his office, surrounded by stacks of papers, looking more disheveled than I'd ever seen him. He looked up, surprised, but recovered quickly. Aaron, he said, forcing a smile. Didn't expect to see you. I gestured at the chaos around him. Looks like things are rough. He sighed, rubbing his temples. We're managing. Just a few setbacks. The market's unpredictable right now. I glanced at the papers. Some of them were past due invoices. Others were legal notices. He noticed my eyes flick over them and quickly gathered them into a pile. It's under control, he said sharply. Is it? I asked. Because from what I've heard, the company's weeks away from defaulting. He slammed his hand on the desk, startling me. Watch your tone, he snapped. You think you know better than me? I built that company from nothing. I didn't flinch. And you're about to lose it. His face went red. You think you're so smart because you got lucky with some t-shirt shops? Don't kid yourself, Aaron. You wouldn't last a month in my world. I stared at him, realizing he'd rather destroy himself than admit I might have done something right. Then maybe that's the problem, I said quietly. He stood up, eyes blazing. You're not going to stand there and lecture me about business. You're still that same impulsive kid who thought he could outsmart everyone. You haven't changed. You've just gotten cockier. I didn't say anything. I just turned to leave. As I reached the door, he said one last thing. The kind of sentence that sticks with you forever. You'll never be more than a footnote in this family, Aaron. Evan's the one who carries the legacy. You're just extra. That word, extra, felt like a knife between my ribs. I walked out, got in my car, and just sat there for a while, hands gripping the wheel. My chest felt tight, but beneath the hurt, something else was building. Determination. Cold, calculated, and unstoppable. A few days later, I got another call, this time from an unfamiliar number. It was someone from a financial firm that had been handling the bankruptcy proceedings for my father's company. They were reaching out to see if I'd be interested in purchasing some of the assets being liquidated. At first, I thought it was a joke. But as the man explained the situation, how quickly things were deteriorating, how undervalued the assets were, a picture started forming in my head. One that made my pulse quicken. It wasn't just about business anymore. It was personal. Still, I didn't say yes. Not yet. Because before I could make that move, I wanted one more conversation. One last chance to see just how far my father's pride would go before everything crumbled. And that chance came sooner than I expected. A week later, he called again. This time, there was no arrogance left in his voice, just exhaustion. Aaron, he said, almost pleading. We're in serious trouble. I need your help. And that's when everything changed. When my father said, I need your help, something in his voice cracked. It was the first time I'd ever heard him sound small. Not angry, not commanding, just cornered. For a moment, I almost forgot everything. The years of insults, the belittling, the endless comparisons. For that split second, I heard my dad, not the man who dismissed me, but the one who used to tuck me in when I was little, back before business became his religion and Evan became his favorite disciple. I took a deep breath and said, all right, tell me what's going on. He sighed, the kind of long, weary sigh that said this conversation had been building for months. The banks pulled out. We lost our credit line. Payroll's due in a week, and we can't make it. If we don't get cash immediately, the company's finished. He said, like I'd been part of it all along. How much are we talking? I asked, even though I already knew the number was going to be ridiculous. 500,000, he said. That would stabilize things for a few months. By then, we'll have secured new contracts. It's temporary. 500,000. He might as well have been asking for a mountain. I leaned back in my chair, letting his words hang. And what happens if I say no? There was a pause, not long, but long enough. Then everything your brother and I built goes down, he said quietly. Everything. I could hear the pride in that sentence, even now. Not regret, not humility, pride. He wasn't worried about the employees or the damage. He was worried about his legacy. Why not sell? I asked. Or restructure? He scoffed. Because I built this company, Aaron. I'm not handing it over to strangers. Strangers like me? That shut him up. I wanted to tell him no right then. To hang up and walk away. But a part of me, the part that still wanted something resembling closure, told me to see this through. I'll think about it, I said. Please, he said softly. Don't wait too long. After I hung up, I sat there in silence. My office lights reflected off the glass window, and for a long time, I just stared at my own reflection. What was I even considering? Helping him? After everything? But there was something deeper here, a chance to see what he'd do when he had to rely on me. 2 days later, I called Evan. He sounded smug, as usual. So you're finally coming around, he said. I just want to know what the actual situation is, I said. Dad told me a number, but I want to hear it from you. He chuckled. Yeah, it's bad. We lost a few major clients, and our liquidity's drying up. But it's salvageable if you step in. You've done pretty well for yourself, right? It's your turn to contribute to the family legacy. There it was again, the legacy. Like I'd been freeloading off it this whole time instead of building my own. What do I get out of this? I asked flatly. He laughed again, but it didn't sound amused. You get to help your family. Isn't that enough? I said nothing. Then he added, look, I'll be honest. If the company goes under, Dad's done. His reputation, his retirement, everything. He's not built to handle failure. I thought about that for a moment. My father, the man who'd spent his life looking down on everyone else, couldn't handle losing control. Maybe that was what scared him most. I'll think about it, I said again. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying every insult, every dismissive comment, but also every small kindness. The time he helped me fix my bike when I was 10, the rare moments when he seemed proud before success turned into his obsession. There was still a part of me, the foolish, hopeful part, that wanted to believe this could be a turning point. Maybe if I helped him, he'd finally see me differently. So the next morning, I called him back. I'll do it, I said. He was quiet for a few seconds, then exhaled, almost in disbelief. You will? Yeah. I'll transfer the funds. But I want it done properly. Legal paperwork, terms, everything. It's a loan, not a gift. Of course, he said quickly. Whatever makes you comfortable. I should have known right then. When my father agreed to something that easily, it meant he was already planning around it. We set a meeting at his office. When I arrived, I saw the decline with my own eyes. Half-empty hallways, staff moving boxes, printers sitting idle. It was eerie. This was the empire he'd built and worshipped for 30 years, now crumbling. He greeted me with a forced smile and a handshake that lingered too long. You're doing the right thing, son. This means more than you know. Evan was there too, flipping through papers. We've drawn up the agreement, he said. Just needs your signature. I skimmed it, but something felt off. This says I'm investing, not loaning. Evan waved a hand dismissively. Legal semantics. It's structured that way for tax reasons. You'll get your money back once the company stabilizes. My gut twisted. I didn't trust them. But against my better judgment, I signed. I wired the money the next day. $500,000. Years of savings, expansion capital, everything I'd built. For a while, things seemed okay. My dad called more often, updating me about the company's turnaround. He'd even asked my opinion on small decisions, which felt surreal after all the years of being ignored. For the first time, I thought maybe things were changing. Then came the board meeting. He invited me to attend, saying he wanted to formally introduce me as part of the leadership. I'll admit, I was nervous but hopeful. Maybe this was finally my chance to stand beside him, to be seen as an equal. When I walked into the conference room, though, everything felt off. The atmosphere was tense. My father sat at the head of the table, flanked by Evan and a few board members I didn't recognize. Glad you could make it, Dad said, smiling thinly. The meeting started with talk about restructuring, new partnerships, and debt consolidation. I kept quiet, listening. Then, halfway through, Evan stood up and handed out folders. We've also decided on a new ownership structure, he said. I opened my folder and froze. My name wasn't on the ownership list, not even as a minority stakeholder. Wait, I said slowly, flipping through the pages. Where am I in this? Dad cleared his throat. We appreciated your contribution, Aaron, but after consulting with our lawyers, we decided it was best to keep the ownership consolidated under existing management. Simpler for tax purposes. I stared at him. So the investment I made, the $500,000, what happens to that? It's being used for operational expenses, Evan said smoothly. Once things are back on track, we'll repay you. Eventually. I felt my stomach drop. Eventually, Dad gave me that same calm, patronizing look he used to give me as a kid when I questioned him. Aaron, don't be dramatic. This isn't personal. It's just business. Just business. That phrase burned into me like a brand. I leaned forward, my voice quiet but shaking. You tricked me. Watch your tone, Dad said sharply. You should be grateful we let you be involved at all. I could have gone to investors instead. Evan smirked. Come on, little bro. You really think a print shop owner belongs in corporate finance meetings? The room went quiet. My face felt hot. I wanted to yell, to slam my fist on the table, but I didn't. I just sat there, staring at them, memorizing every smug expression. I realized then that they hadn't changed. Not one bit. All that kindness, those calls, those invitations, it was all manipulation. They'd used me as a lifeline, and now that they had my money, I was disposable again. The meeting ended with polite handshakes, as if nothing had happened. I walked out without saying a word. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The humiliation, the betrayal, the sheer arrogance. They hadn't just taken my money. They'd confirmed everything I'd always feared. That to my father, I'd never be enough. A few days later, I got a call from one of my employees, a friend I trusted. "Hey, Aaron," he said carefully. "I thought you should know. Your brother's company reached out. They're trying to poach our design team." I nearly dropped the phone. "What?" "Yeah. They offered higher pay and said you were planning to sell your business. They made it sound like you're shutting down." That's when it hit me. Not only had they taken my money, they were actively trying to sabotage me. That was the breaking point. I drove to my parents' house that night. My mother answered the door, startled to see me. "Aaron, honey, what? Where's Dad?" I asked. She hesitated. "He's in his study." I walked straight in. He was sitting at his desk, pretending to work. When he saw me, he looked annoyed. "This isn't a good time." I slammed my hand on the desk. "You tried to steal my team." He didn't even blink. "They reached out to us, not the other way around." "Don't lie to me," I said. "You're trying to cripple my business after stealing my money." He stood up slowly, meeting my eyes. "Watch your words, Aaron. You're angry, and you're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly," I said. "You took everything I gave you, and then you tried to destroy the only thing I built without you." He leaned forward slightly, his voice low. "You wouldn't have that business without me. I gave you the drive, the example, the ambition. Don't kid yourself, you're still standing in my shadow." I stared at him, speechless. That's when I realized something important. My father didn't want my success. He needed my failure. It was the only way he could keep his illusion of superiority alive. I left that night without another word. But something inside me had changed. The naive part that still wanted his approval was gone. In its place was something colder, clearer. The next morning, I made a few calls, to lawyers, to the financial firm handling his bankruptcy, and to a few contacts who owed me favors. Because if he wanted a war, he'd just declared one. For the first time in my adult life, I truly understood what silence could feel like. Not the peaceful kind, but the heavy, suffocating kind that wraps itself around your chest and doesn't let go. After that night, after walking out of my father's study, I didn't speak to anyone in my family for weeks. Not Mom, not Evan, not even distant relatives who occasionally called to gossip about the family company. I turned off my phone more often than not, showing up at the office just to bury myself in work. But even there, the damage lingered like smoke after a fire. My team could tell something was wrong. They saw how distracted I'd become, how I'd stare at my computer screen without typing a single word. I'd been betrayed before, by friends, partners, even clients. But this was different. This was my own family. And the worst part wasn't losing the money. It was realizing they never even saw what they did as wrong. To them, using me had been the logical thing to do. At first, I told myself I'd just move on. That revenge wasn't worth it, that I should focus on rebuilding what I'd lost. But every night, as I sat alone in my apartment, that lie grew harder to believe. I'd replay the board meeting in my head, Evan's smug grin, my father's dismissive tone, over and over. It was like my brain wouldn't let me rest until I did something about it. Still, before any kind of something, there came the collapse. The $500,000 I'd given them had left my company tight on cash. I'd stretched myself thin to cover it, pulling from my personal savings, delaying expansion plans, even taking a smaller paycheck to make payroll. I told my employees everything was fine, but inside, I was terrified. I'd risked everything for people who laughed in my face. Then, 3 months later, things got worse. One of my suppliers called to inform me that a new competitor had underbid me for a major contract. The same contract I'd held for 2 years straight. The name of the new bidder? My father's company. I couldn't believe it. They were undercutting me, again. Despite being insolvent, despite everything they owed, they were still clawing for scraps of business just to make sure I didn't get them. I called the client myself. We'd worked together for years, so they were honest with me. "Aaron, I hate to say this," the manager said, "but your father's company came in with a price we couldn't refuse. And, he said some things, implied your business was struggling." I gripped the phone tighter. "He told you that?" "Yeah," the manager said awkwardly. "I'm sorry, man. You're good at what you do, but they made it sound like you're closing down soon." After I hung up, I just sat there in my office, staring at the wall. It was surreal, like watching someone kick your legs out from under you and then asking why you're on the ground. That night, I went home and didn't turn on the lights. I just sat on the couch in the dark, letting the city hum faintly outside my window. The silence pressed in until it hurt. I remember whispering to myself, maybe they're right. Maybe I really can't win. I didn't sleep that night. Or the next. I started skipping meals, missing deadlines, avoiding people. Even when my best friend and operations manager, Dean, knocked on my door one morning, I didn't answer. He let himself in anyway. I'd given him a spare key for emergencies. He took one look at me, unshaven, surrounded by empty coffee cups and unopened mail, and said, "You look like you've been run over." "Feels like it," I muttered. He sat down across from me. "What happened, man? You've been a ghost lately." I told him everything. The money, the manipulation, the boardroom ambush, the sabotage. I didn't even mean to unload it all, but once I started, it came spilling out like a dam had finally broken. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You know, I've met a lot of arrogant people in business, but your dad, he sounds like he's on another level." "Yeah," I said bitterly. "He's proud of it." Dean leaned forward. "So what now?" "I don't know," I said. "Maybe nothing. Maybe I just walk away and start fresh somewhere else." "Do you really believe that?" he asked. I didn't answer. He exhaled. "You've built something amazing, Aaron. You didn't get lucky. You earned every inch of it. If they think they can destroy you, they're wrong. But you can't fight back like this. Not when you're half broken." He was right. I was running on fumes, physically, mentally, emotionally. For the next few weeks, I focused on survival. I cut unnecessary costs, took on smaller projects, and restructured my business to stay afloat. It wasn't glamorous, but it kept the lights on. Still, every morning when I walked into my office, I could feel how much smaller my world had become. And then came the final blow, the one that pushed me past the point of no return. It was late on a Friday when I got a letter in the mail. A thick envelope stamped with my father's company logo. Inside was a formal notice. They were terminating a small service agreement my company had with them, one that dated back to when I first started. It wasn't about the money. It was the message that came attached. Scrawled at the bottom, in my father's handwriting, were 5 words. "Stick to what you know." That was it. No explanation. No courtesy. Just a cold reminder that, even after taking my money, after humiliating me, he still wanted the last word. I sat there staring at that note for what felt like an hour. My hands were shaking, not from anger this time, but from clarity. He wasn't going to stop. He wasn't going to wake up one day and regret what he'd done. People like my father don't feel remorse. They feel entitlement. They convince themselves they're right until the end. So I decided to stop expecting decency from him. That weekend, I went away. No phone, no laptop, just me in a cabin a few hours out of the city. I needed space to think, to breathe. The first day, I did nothing but sleep. The second day, I sat outside with a notebook and started writing everything down. Not a revenge plan, not yet. Just clarity. I wrote about the early days of my business, the nights I'd worked until sunrise, the people who'd believed in me when my own family didn't. I wrote about the kind of person I wanted to be, someone who didn't need validation to know his worth. And slowly, through all that scribbling, something started to shift. By the third day, I wasn't writing about the past anymore. I was sketching ideas, calculations, possibilities. When I returned to the city, I felt different. Still angry, yes, but sharper. Focused. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not Dean, not my employees. I just started making quiet moves. The first thing I did was call my accountant and tell him I wanted to liquidate some non-essential assets. Then I met with a mergers consultant, anonymously, and began gathering information about businesses listed for bankruptcy acquisition in my area. I didn't mention my father's company by name. Not yet. I just wanted to understand how the process worked, what it would take, how long it would last, and what kind of money would be involved. The consultant smiled. "You'd be surprised how often people buy out struggling companies for pennies on the dollar, especially family businesses. Emotions make bad financial decisions." Emotions. That word stuck with me. My father's emotions, his pride, his arrogance, were the reason his empire was crumbling. Over the next month, I started visiting other print companies. I met with suppliers, investors, even lawyers who specialized in acquisitions. On the surface, I was just networking. But underneath, I was gathering intelligence. Every piece of information I collected felt like another small stone in the foundation of something bigger. And yet, even as I planned, there were nights when doubt crept in. Was I really going to go that far? Buy my father's company, the same one he'd said I'd never be good enough for, just to prove a point? Would that make me any better than him? But then I'd remember the boardroom, the laughter, the smugness. I'd remember the note, stick to what you know. And I'd know my answer. Still, I played it cool. When Mom called one afternoon to check in, I acted normal. She asked if I'd reconsidered helping your father again, and I told her gently, no, Mom, not this time. She sighed. He's under so much stress, Aaron. He's not himself lately. He's exactly himself, I said quietly. The truth was, the company was collapsing faster than anyone realized. Rumors spread among suppliers and clients. Banks started freezing accounts, and their credit rating tanked. By the end of that quarter, they were hanging by a thread. I didn't interfere. I didn't gloat. I just watched. There's a strange kind of peace that comes when you stop fighting for people who'll never see your worth. It's like finally dropping a weight you didn't realize you were carrying. I stopped checking their website. Stopped listening to gossip. Stopped waiting for an apology that would never come. But fate has a funny way of circling back to those who wronged you, especially when pride blinds them to their own downfall. And when that circle started to close, I was ready. Because by then, my quiet planning wasn't so quiet anymore. When I say things started turning around, I don't mean there was some grand, cinematic moment. No victory music, no standing ovation. It began quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the tide shifting after a long, violent storm. After months of living under that fog of humiliation and anger, I started to rebuild. But this time, it wasn't out of desperation or some hollow need for approval. It was out of resolve. Cold, deliberate, patient resolve. The first change came in my business. When I came back from that cabin, my employees noticed immediately. The slump in my shoulders was gone. I started showing up earlier, speaking with clarity again, taking control. The print company I had nearly lost became leaner, sharper. We pivoted our focus from local contracts to digital branding. I invested in new design software, hired two young but hungry social media strategists, and built an in-house creative team that started producing full-scale campaigns for clients. Within 6 months, revenue not only recovered, it doubled. I remember sitting in my office one night, going over the numbers with Dean. He whistled softly. You know, a year ago I was half expecting you to walk away from all this. So was I admitted. He looked at me. But you didn't. And I've got to say, man, this is different. You're different. I leaned back in my chair and smiled faintly. Different's good. He studied me for a moment. You're planning something, aren't you? I shrugged. Maybe. He chuckled. Whatever it is, it's going to be big. He wasn't wrong. Over the next few months, I poured everything I had into expanding quietly but efficiently. I didn't post about it online, didn't brag, didn't even tell my friends. My father's words, stick to what you know, had burned deep enough that I'd turned it into a mantra. I did stick to what I knew. Persistence, discipline, and patience. By the time the new fiscal year rolled around, my business had evolved far beyond what it used to be. We weren't just a print shop anymore. We'd become a creative branding firm, one that handled identity design, product packaging, web development, and marketing strategy. Then, almost by accident, we went viral. One of our clients, a small eco-friendly clothing brand, exploded on social media after we helped them launch a visually stunning campaign. The results caught the attention of a few larger companies, and before I knew it, we had corporate clients reaching out, offering contracts worth 6 figures. That's when the growth became exponential. I hired more staff. I leased a bigger office, one with glass walls and a skyline view that looked eerily similar to my father's old boardroom. Only this one didn't smell like arrogance and cigar smoke. It smelled like success built from the ground up. And then, one afternoon, I got a message from someone unexpected, a recruiter from a venture capital firm. They'd been following our company's growth and wanted to discuss a potential investment. I agreed to meet, not because I needed funding, but because I wanted to see what people outside my bubble saw in me. The meeting took place in a sleek downtown office. I walked in wearing a charcoal suit I hadn't worn since my cousin's wedding, a gift from my mother years ago that still fit perfectly. The recruiter, a sharp woman named Clara, greeted me with a firm handshake. I've gone through your numbers, she said, flipping open a folder. You're profitable, expanding steadily, and have almost no debt. That's impressive for a company your size. Thank you, I said evenly. She leaned forward, smiling. You're an outlier, Aaron. Most small businesses collapse before they hit your revenue bracket. What's your secret? I smiled faintly. Bad motivation. She laughed. That's a new one. I didn't elaborate. Some things didn't need to be said out loud. After that meeting, I realized something strange. I didn't crave validation anymore. Not from my father, not from investors, not from anyone. The numbers spoke for themselves. My team's loyalty spoke for itself. The long nights, the self-doubt, the slow grind. All of it had built a foundation stronger than anything inherited or handed down. And yet, despite all the growth, I kept an eye on one thing, my father's company. Through quiet channels, suppliers, mutual contacts, even a former accountant who owed me a favor, I stayed informed. What I learned painted a grim picture. Their debts had snowballed. Clients were pulling out. Lawsuits from unpaid vendors were piling up. They tried restructuring twice and failed both times. Even Evan had started making excuses, quietly diverting funds to protect himself. They were collapsing. I wish I could say I felt happy about it. I didn't, not at first. It felt more like watching a slow-motion car crash you saw coming years ago. But underneath the sadness, something else grew. A calm certainty. Because I knew where this road led. When I got the call from the financial firm that handled bankruptcies, it didn't even surprise me. Mr. Callahan, the man said, we're reaching out to inform you that Callahan Industries is entering final bankruptcy proceedings. We'll be liquidating assets over the next few months. Would you like to be notified when they go to auction? I took a slow breath, pretending to think. Yes, I said. Notify me. After I hung up, I sat back in my chair and stared at the skyline through the glass wall of my office. The sun was setting, that golden hour glow spilling over the city, and for the first time, I felt something I hadn't in years. Power. Not the kind my father used to wield through intimidation or titles, but the quiet, self-earned kind that doesn't need to shout. The next day, I told Dean. He blinked. Wait, you're serious? You're going to buy it. If the numbers make sense, yes. He leaned back in disbelief. You realize what that means, right? You'd be buying the same company your dad built. Exactly, I said calmly. He stared at me for a long moment. You're not doing this for money. No, I said softly. I'm doing it for closure. Dean nodded slowly. You've got the funds. And the network. Hell, with your credit, you could probably buy it outright. I won't need to, I said. They'll sell it for pennies. That company's just a shell now. Over the next few weeks, I gathered my team of lawyers, accountants, and advisors. We reviewed every document, every asset listing, every debt clause. The more we uncovered, the more I realized how careless my father had become. His arrogance had blinded him to the rot underneath. One night, after reviewing a stack of reports, Dean looked up from his laptop. You know, he said, this is poetic. You're about to own the same building where he once told you you'd never make it. I smiled faintly. Yeah, but this time, I'll be the one deciding who gets to stay. Still, as the day of the auction approached, something strange happened. My mother called. I hadn't heard her voice in months. It was trembling. Aaron, she said, your father's not doing well. He's changed. Has he? I asked quietly. She hesitated. He barely leaves the house. He's lost weight. He doesn't talk to anyone. Evan's been trying to keep things together, but it's bad. Did he ever apologize? I asked. She went silent. He's proud. You know how he is. Yeah, I said flatly. I know exactly how he is. She sighed. Aaron, whatever you're planning, please don't do anything cruel. I'm not, I said. But I won't protect him from consequences either. That was the truth. I wasn't planning to humiliate him publicly. I didn't need to. The humiliation was already built into the collapse. I was just there to make sure it reached the right conclusion. As the auction date approached, I could feel the tension in the air, that electric sense that something irreversible was about to happen. The night before, I went for a drive, something I hadn't done in years just for the sake of clearing my head. The city was quiet, the streets glowing with soft light, and I caught a glimpse of the old Callahan Industries building as I passed by. The once bustling parking lot was nearly empty. The company logo on the front sign was faded and crooked. I parked across the street and just watched. It looked smaller than I remembered, less imposing. The glass panels that used to gleam like mirrors were streaked and dirty. I thought of all the nights I'd walked past that building as a teenager, looking up at my father's office window, wondering what it would take for him to see me. Now I knew the answer. He never would. But that didn't matter anymore. Because in less than 24 hours, I was going to own everything he'd once lorded over me, not to destroy it, but to reclaim what was taken, to prove, silently and undeniably, that I'd made it. And as I sat there in my car, engine idling softly, I whispered to myself, "You'll never make it on your own, huh?" The words no longer hurt. They sounded like the setup to a punchline that had taken years to land. Tomorrow, I thought, I'll deliver the punchline. The morning of the auction felt like the first day of winter. Crisp air, faint fog over the city, that strange stillness before something big happens. I woke up early, not because I needed to, but because my mind wouldn't let me rest. I'd gone over every detail of this plan so many times that it no longer felt like strategy. It felt like destiny catching up to itself. I remember sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, watching the steam rise as the sun began to climb through the blinds. For years, I used to sit like this before work, back when I was scraping to survive, back when my father's voice lived in my head telling me I'd never amount to anything. But that morning, the silence was different. It wasn't heavy anymore. It was steady, purposeful. The auction wasn't public. It was one of those quiet, invitation-only events for potential buyers vetted by the liquidation firm. They didn't want chaos, just clean transactions. The assets from Callahan Industries were being divided into lots, equipment, real estate, client lists, trademarks. I didn't plan to take everything. I just wanted the heart of it, the building, the brand name, and the intellectual property. By the time I arrived at the downtown law office hosting the sale, I was calm, dressed in a tailored navy suit, hair neat, face composed. Dean was already there, waiting by the elevator. "Big day," he said, handing me a folder. Inside was every legal document I'd need, verified funds, identification, pre-approved credit lines. The kind of preparation my father always bragged about having. "Big day," I echoed, my voice steady. The auction itself was smaller than I expected. Maybe 20 people in a polished conference room, most of them business types or investment reps. At the front stood a pair of bankruptcy lawyers from the firm, their tone detached and professional, as if they weren't selling the remnants of someone's life's work. When the Callahan Industries lot came up, something strange happened. The lead auctioneer cleared his throat and said, "Next, we'll be proceeding with the sale of Callahan Industries' primary assets, including headquarters property, proprietary client data, and remaining equipment." I felt a flicker of emotion I hadn't prepared for. Hearing the name spoken like that, stripped of weight, of pride, of legacy, was surreal. I thought of my father sitting in that same office years ago, the walls lined with plaques and photos of him shaking hands with mayors and executives. Now it was just another asset number in a file. The bidding started modestly, a few property developers tossing around lowball offers. They saw it as real estate, not history. But I wasn't just there for the building. I wanted control of the name. Dean leaned over and whispered, "You sure about this? You could get the building cheaper if you wait for the relisting." I didn't take my eyes off the auctioneer. "I don't want the building," I said quietly. "I want the name." When the bidding paused at a comfortable 6 figures, I raised my hand. The auctioneer nodded. "We have a new bid, 800,000. The room shifted. Heads turned. Suddenly, I wasn't just another suit in the back row. One of the other bidders, a developer with too much cologne and too little patience, raised his paddle. 900,000. I didn't flinch. 1.2 million. The room went silent. The auctioneer blinked. 1.2 million from Mr. Callahan. There it was, my last name, echoing across the room, attached to a different kind of legacy this time. After that, nobody challenged me. The hammer fell, and the auctioneer said the words I'd been waiting to hear my entire adult life. Sold. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just exhaled slowly, feeling something I couldn't name. Not triumph exactly, something quieter. Vindication, maybe. Dean patted my shoulder. "You did it." "Yeah," I said softly. "I did." We stayed behind to finalize the paperwork, signatures echoing against marble walls. The lawyers congratulated me in that sterile, transactional way. To them, this was just business. To me, it was a chapter closing and another one opening. But revenge is rarely as simple as owning what someone else lost. That was just the foundation. The real work came after. The first thing I did once the sale cleared was visit the building. It was a gray afternoon when I drove up, the parking lot still half filled with old company trucks and faded signs. The security guard recognized me immediately. He was an older man named Frank, who'd worked there for decades. I remembered him from my childhood visits. He squinted when I stepped out of the car. "Aaron, is that you?" "Hey, Frank," I said, smiling faintly. "Been a while." He looked at me, then at the new ownership papers I showed him. "You bought it?" "Yeah," I said. "Guess so." He let out a low whistle. "Your dad's gonna lose his mind." I chuckled. "Maybe, but I'm not here to rub it in. Just need a look around." He nodded and handed me the master key. "Place is yours now, boss." Boss. The word hit differently. I stepped inside, and the air felt still, like time had frozen somewhere between pride and decay. The lobby was dusty, the company's logo half detached from the wall. I walked past empty cubicles, through dark hallways that once smelled like expensive cologne and printer ink. When I reached my father's old office, I stopped at the door. The gold plaque that used to say Richard Callahan, founder and CEO, was still there, though tarnished and scratched. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The blinds were half closed, letting in narrow slits of light that fell across the desk, his desk. The one he used to sit behind when I was a kid, towering over me as he said things like, "You'll never understand real business," or "You need to grow up, Aaron." Now it was covered in dust and old paperwork. I ran a hand across the surface, feeling the fine grit cling to my fingers. Then I sat down in his chair. It creaked. The leather was cracked, but it still had that same commanding angle, the one designed to make anyone sitting across feel smaller. I leaned back and looked around the room. For a long time, I just sat there, letting the quiet fill every corner. Then I whispered, "Looks like I made it on my own after all." The words didn't sound like triumph. They sounded like peace. Dean joined me an hour later with the finalized documents. "You officially own every major asset of Callahan Industries," he said. "Property, trademarks, client lists, all of it." I nodded slowly. "Good. What now?" I looked out the window. The city stretched beyond the glass, the same skyline my father used to look at as if it belonged to him. Now we rebuild, but differently. And that's what I did. I didn't strip the company for parts or sell it off. Instead, I rebranded it, merged it into my own firm. We combined resources, absorbed the client lists, rehired select employees who'd been loyal but left when things got bad. Within months, what used to be Callahan Industries was operating again, but under a new banner, Callahan Creative Group, my name, my vision. It was poetic symmetry. My father had spent his life using that name as a symbol of power and dominance. I was turning it into something human, collaborative, modern. Still, I wasn't naive. I knew this wasn't just about business anymore. Word would get around, it always does. And sooner or later, my father would find out. I didn't plan to tell him right away. I wanted the information to reach him naturally, the way arrogance makes truth travel, whispered in circles, impossible to ignore. In the meantime, I focused on solidifying my position. Over the next few weeks, I hired 2 key people, a financial strategist who specialized in corporate turnarounds and a PR consultant who understood narrative. I wanted to control not just the company, but the story. We drafted a press release, professional, clean, emotionally neutral. It announced that Callahan Creative Group had acquired the assets of Callahan Industries and was committed to continuing the company's legacy through innovation and modern practices. No malice, no pettiness, just facts. Dean read over the draft and grinned. "This is brilliant," he said. "You're not insulting him. You're erasing him, quietly." "Exactly," I said. Let the silence speak for me. When the press release went live, it spread quickly through local business circles. Small headlines appeared on trade websites and regional news outlets. Local entrepreneur revives defunct family business under new vision. The phone calls started soon after. Former clients wanted to work with me again. Suppliers offered better rates. Even the Chamber of Commerce sent a congratulatory email. Each new message was another reminder that I'd taken back what was mine and elevated it beyond anything my father had achieved. But then, a week later, it happened. I was in my office when my assistant buzzed me. "Aaron, there's someone here to see you. Says it's urgent." "Who is it?" She hesitated. "He says his name is Richard Callahan. For a moment, I froze. My pulse slowed. The air in the room seemed to thin. My father. After all this time. Send him in, I said quietly. The door opened, and there he was, the man who'd spent a lifetime towering over me, looking somehow smaller now. His suit hung loose, his hair grayer, his face older. He carried himself with that same rigid posture, but his eyes looked tired. He glanced around the office, taking in the modern decor, the framed awards, the logo on the wall, Callahan Creative Group. When his gaze landed on me, he hesitated. For the first time in my life, my father looked unsure of himself. Aaron, he said finally, voice hoarse. We need to talk. And I knew, in that instant, that every plan, every patient move, every quiet step toward this moment had been leading right here. When my father said, we need to talk, it was almost surreal hearing those words come from him. The same man who used to lecture me for hours, who never listened when I spoke, who treated every disagreement as a challenge to his authority, now standing in my office, looking like a man who'd aged 10 years in one. For a moment, I didn't say anything. I just studied him, the way his shoulders sagged under the weight of something heavier than pride. His hands, once steady and commanding, trembled slightly as he gripped the back of a chair. Go ahead, I said finally, gesturing for him to sit. We've got time. He lowered himself into the seat across from me, the leather creaking softly. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the minimalist design, the hum of quiet productivity outside, the sign behind me that read Callahan Creative Group. He didn't need to ask. He already knew. I saw the article, he said after a long silence. About the acquisition. I leaned back in my chair. Yeah, it's been a busy few weeks. His jaw tensed. You bought the company. I did, I said simply. Fair and square. He stared at me for a long moment, trying to read something in my expression. Maybe he expected me to gloat, to throw every insult he'd ever hurled back in his face. But I wasn't going to give him that satisfaction. I'd spent too many years living under his voice. This time, silence was louder. Finally, he spoke again. Why? I let the question hang for a few seconds. You know why? I said quietly. He looked down at his hands. If this is about revenge. It's not, I cut in. Revenge would mean I wanted to see you hurt. What I wanted was to see you face yourself. And that's already happening, isn't it? His eyes flicked up to mine, sharp again for a moment, like the man I grew up with. You think this makes you better than me? No, I said calmly. It just proves you were wrong. That made him flinch. Just a little, but I saw it. He looked around the room again, his gaze lingering on a framed photograph on the wall, a picture of my team celebrating our most recent milestone. I could see something shifting behind his eyes. Maybe regret, maybe disbelief. It didn't matter anymore. I didn't come here to argue, he said, his voice low. I came to ask if there's a place for me here. I almost laughed. Not mockingly, but out of pure disbelief. A place. I repeated. He nodded stiffly. You're doing well. Better than I expected. Maybe I can help. You could use my experience. It was strange. Part of me had imagined this moment for years, fantasized about what it would feel like to have him ask me for something. But now that it was real, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt hollow. I studied him for a long time before answering. You know, Dad, when I first started my business, I came to you for help. Do you remember what you said? He didn't reply. You said I'd never make it on my own. I continued. You laughed when I told you I wanted to build something real. You told me hard work only counts when it's done your way. He swallowed. I was trying to protect you. By humiliating me? I said softly. By using my money and cutting me out? By trying to destroy the only thing I built. His lips pressed into a thin line. I made mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to lock your car, I said. What you did was deliberate. For a moment, the only sound was the faint ticking of the clock on the wall. He looked like he wanted to fight back, to reclaim some authority, but there was nothing left to stand on. His company was gone. His reputation was fading. And for the first time in his life, he had to confront the reality that he wasn't untouchable. I leaned forward, my tone quiet but firm. You're right about one thing. I do have a place for you here. He looked up sharply. You do? I nodded. As a consultant. Temporary. Limited contract. You'll report directly to one of my department heads. I watched his expression shift, confusion, disbelief, then something close to anger. You're joking. No, I said evenly. You wanted to offer me a job years ago, remember? Said maybe Evan could find me a spot at the company if I got serious? I'm just returning the favor. His eyes narrowed. You think this is funny? Not at all, I said. It's practical. You still have some experience. You'll be compensated fairly. But you'll answer to people younger than you. People who've earned their positions without being handed them. He stared at me like he was seeing someone else entirely. Not the son he'd dismissed, but a man he no longer recognized. Finally, he said, I don't take orders from children. I smiled faintly. Then I guess you don't take them from employers either. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then he stood up, straightening his jacket like a man trying to salvage the last shred of dignity he had left. You've made your point, he said coldly. No, I replied. I'm still making it. He glared at me, but I could tell the fire wasn't real anymore. It was habit, the echo of authority long gone. He turned to leave, but before he reached the door, I said, You know, I didn't buy your company to destroy you, Dad. I bought it because it was mine all along. You just couldn't stand to see that. He paused, his back to me. You think this will make up for everything? No, I said quietly. It doesn't have to. He left without another word. When the door closed, the room felt oddly still again. Not empty, just quiet in a way that felt finished. A few minutes later, Dean walked in. That him? Yeah. How'd it go? I looked out the window at the skyline. Exactly how it needed to. He nodded slowly. So what now? I smiled faintly. Now I build something bigger. And that's exactly what I did. Over the next year, Callahan Creative Group became one of the fastest growing branding firms in the region. We expanded into digital media, advertising, and design automation. My father's former employees who'd been loyal but discarded found new homes under my leadership. Some of them even told me privately that they preferred working for this Callahan. I never saw my father in the office again after that day, though I heard things. How he'd tried consulting for smaller businesses, but couldn't adjust to no longer being the one in charge. How Evan had left town to chase another big opportunity and ended up working for a mid-tier logistics company. How Mom would sometimes bring him news about how your father isn't himself lately. To which I'd quietly reply, he never really was. But the real moment of closure came unexpectedly. About a year and a half later, I was attending a local business award gala. It wasn't something I usually enjoyed, but my company had been nominated for an innovation award. Midway through the evening, as I stood by the bar talking to Clara, the same investor who once said I was an outlier, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was my mother. She looked radiant as ever, her kind smile untouched by the chaos around her. Aaron, she said softly, your father's here. I turned, and there he was. He looked older than I remembered, smaller, somehow. The arrogance that once filled every room he walked into was gone, replaced by a kind of quiet humility I'd never seen before. He approached slowly, hands clasped in front of him. Congratulations, he said simply. Thank you, I replied. He nodded toward the award on the table beside me. You earned it. For a second, I almost didn't recognize him. There was no sarcasm, no condescension, just honesty. I did, I said softly. On my own. He gave a faint smile, sad, but genuine. Yeah, he murmured. You did. We stood there for a few moments, both of us aware that there was nothing left to say. No apology that could erase years of resentment. No conversation that could rebuild what had been broken. He left soon after, blending into the crowd like a man finally ready to fade from his own story. When I looked down at the award again, the plaque with my name on it, the logo of the company I'd rebuilt from his ashes, I didn't feel anger or triumph. I felt something cleaner. Peace. Later that night, after the gala ended, I went back to the office. The city lights shimmered against the windows as I walked through the quiet halls. I stopped outside my office, hand resting on the door handle. The gold plaque that read Aaron Callahan, founder and CEO, caught the light. For a long moment, I just looked at it. Then I smiled, opened the door, and stepped inside. The same chair he once sat in, that symbol of authority, power, and pride, now felt completely different beneath me. It didn't creak. It didn't intimidate. It fit. And as I looked out at the skyline, the one he once said belonged to him, I whispered the words I'd waited years to say, not with anger, but with calm certainty. I made it on my own. Then I leaned back in my chair, closed my eyes, and let the silence speak for itself. Because sometimes, the sweetest revenge isn't destruction. It's becoming everything they swore you never could. My name is Jonas, I'm 29, and until recently, I thought I'd finally found peace with my family. Not love, not warmth, just peace. A cold, silent ceasefire where I kept my distance, and they stopped pretending they cared. But that illusion shattered the day of my brother's wedding, a day that was supposed to be about unity, love, and celebration. Unless, of course, you're the family's designated afterthought. I hadn't even planned on going. I'd spent years away, ever since I moved across the country for grad school and decided not to come home every holiday just to be treated like a burden. But when Liam, my younger brother, sent the invitation, I was surprised. It was formal, stiff, but it had my name on it. No +1. No little note inside. Just my name, the venue, and the time. I wasn't expecting much. Still, something in me wanted to show up. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was curiosity. Or maybe, deep down, some foolish part of me thought they'd grown up. That they'd finally stopped punishing me for not being the golden child. Growing up, Liam could do no wrong. Straight A's, captain of the soccer team, the charming kid who could break a window and somehow still get praised for his spirit. Meanwhile, I was the quiet one. The one who liked books more than games, who asked questions they didn't want to answer, who once told our mom I didn't want to go to church anymore and got grounded for 3 weeks. I was too sensitive, too serious, too distant. And when I left home for college and didn't look back, that label turned into ungrateful. Still, I bought them a gift. Not just any gift, something meaningful. A custom hand-carved dining set I'd commissioned from a local artisan near where I live now. 6 chairs, a heavy oak table, and their initials engraved in the center. I spent weeks on it. Not to win them over, not even to be thanked. Just because I still wanted to do the right thing. To show I cared in my own way. The ceremony itself was fine. Boring, if I'm being honest. The kind of stiff, overproduced wedding you'd expect from a couple more in love with Instagram than each other. I sat quietly in the back row of the chapel, tucked between 2 cousins I hadn't seen in years. No one said hello. My mom looked through me when she passed down the aisle. My dad gave me a nod that felt more like obligation than greeting. Liam? He didn't even glance my way. Not until the reception. The venue was a sprawling vineyard, all polished wood and string lights, with a view of the hills that probably cost more than my apartment. Guests were ushered into the main hall by name. Everyone had an assigned table with pretty calligraphy place cards. I waited in line patiently, hoping maybe someone had remembered I was here. When I gave my name, the woman at the check-in table looked confused. Jonas, she asked, flipping through her list. Oh yes, you're actually over there. She pointed vaguely past the dance floor, toward a narrow space between the DJ booth and the storage area. At first I thought she was mistaken, but then I saw it. A single metal fold-up chair. No table, no place card, no setting. Just a chair behind a stack of speakers, inches from the back wall, next to a bin of power cables. I stared at it for a second, wondering if maybe this was some sort of mistake. That's when she walked up, Ava, the bride. She looked me up and down like I was something stuck to the bottom of her designer shoe. Oh, good. You found your seat, she said sweetly. We figured it made more sense for you to be near the music, since you're not really part of the main group. I blinked. What? You know, she added, lips tightening into a faux smile. Close family only at the tables. You understand, right? I didn't answer. I was still trying to figure out if she was joking. Before I could respond, my mom appeared beside her, holding a champagne flute like she was posing for a magazine spread. She didn't even wait for an explanation. Just gave a little shrug and said, "It's not like you're important, Jonas." That one hit harder than I expected. I don't know why. It's not like I hadn't heard it before, just never that blunt. Never at a wedding, with laughter ringing around me and a $1,000 cake 3 feet away. I stood there, frozen for a moment. Then I looked at the chair again. That pathetic little chair in the corner. My name wasn't on it. No one would even notice if I sat there, or if I vanished. So I smiled. That calm, deliberate kind of smile that says more than any insult could. I turned around, walked to the front of the venue where the gifts were piled up near the entryway, and spotted mine immediately. The box was huge, wrapped in deep blue paper with a cream ribbon. I lifted it easily, muscles tightening as I hoisted it into my arms. Someone saw me. A cousin, maybe. She nudged another. Within seconds, whispers started to spread like smoke through the crowd. I didn't rush. I walked slowly, purposefully, right past the tables where everyone was seated. I passed my parents, who turned just in time to see me heading toward the door. "Jonas," my mom barked. "What are you doing?" I didn't stop. I didn't speak. That's when Liam finally noticed me. He was mid-conversation, drink in hand, grinning at one of his groomsmen. But his eyes flicked to the gift, then to me, and his brow furrowed. "Hey," he called. "What are you?" But before he could finish, I reached the threshold of the hall. The music, which had been thumping some overplayed wedding anthem, suddenly cut out. Silence poured in like cold water. I turned slightly, just enough to meet his gaze. "You're right," I said clearly. "I'm not important. So I'll take back what I brought." Gasps. A few stifled laughs. Chairs scraped the floor as people twisted to watch. I didn't wait to see their reactions. And that was the moment everything began to unravel. I stepped out into the evening air, the box in my arms heavier with every step I took, not because of the weight, but because of everything it now symbolized. My breath came slow and steady, but my mind was on fire. Not with rage, exactly. It wasn't even sadness anymore. It was a kind of emptiness. A quiet realization that I had spent years trying to earn the bare minimum of respect from people who had already decided I didn't matter. I reached my car, a modest gray sedan parked in the gravel lot down the hill. The gift barely fit in the back seat. As I closed the door, I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel behind me. "Jonas." It was Liam. I didn't turn around. I opened my driver's side door and slid in, my hand hovering over the ignition. "Are you seriously doing this right now?" he asked, breathless. "What is wrong with you?" I looked at him through the window. "You gave me a chair behind the DJ booth, Liam." He threw up his hands. "It was Ava's idea. She said you'd want space. And you went along with it." He stepped closer. "Come on, man, it's just a seat. Why are you making this into a big thing? You didn't even RSVP." "I did." I emailed back. "That doesn't count." I almost laughed. "Okay." He stared at me, jaw tight, eyes flickering like he was trying to come up with something to say that would undo the last hour. "You didn't even say congratulations. You didn't even say hello." He flinched at that, just for a second. Then he tried to recover. "You think you're above all this, don't you? That you're better than us because you left." There it was. The real reason. The root of it all. The quiet resentment that had been simmering for years, now bubbling up in the parking lot while the wedding of the year carried on behind us. "I don't think I'm better," I said, voice low. "I think I deserved a chair at a table. That's all." He stepped back like my words had slapped him. And in that moment, I saw him clearly. Not the smiling groom, not the golden boy, but the kid who had always needed me to be less so he could be more. The one who couldn't bear the thought that I might exist outside his spotlight. "I'm leaving," I said. "Don't worry. I won't ruin anything else." He didn't move to stop me. He just watched as I started the car and backed out, gravel crunching beneath my tires. As I pulled away from the vineyard, I passed a few guests who were outside taking photos. One of them, a woman I vaguely remembered as one of Ava's cousins, gave me a curious look. I nodded once, calmly, and kept driving. I didn't go home right away. I needed to think. I ended up at a quiet overlook about 20 minutes from the venue. I parked the car, got out, and sat on the hood, looking out over the hills. The sky was dark now, streaked with the last hints of dusk. The box sat behind me, untouched. My gift, my gesture, my stupid, naive hope that maybe this time I'd be welcomed. I thought about everything. About the years of passive-aggressive remarks. The holidays where I was treated like a guest in my own home. The times I called and got voicemail. The birthdays they forgot. The way my mom always introduced Liam as our pride and joy and referred to me as the other one. And still, I had shown up. Still, I had tried. I took out my phone, opened the group chat with my parents and siblings, it hadn't been used in months, and typed something simple. "I'm done." Then I turned off my phone. I didn't know what the fallout would be. I didn't know if they'd call, or rage, or pretend none of it happened. But I did know this. I wasn't going to let them break me anymore. I drove home that night with the windows down, letting the air cool my skin and my thoughts. When I got back to my apartment, I brought the box inside and left it in the living room. I didn't open it. I didn't need to. Just knowing it was mine again felt like enough. For now. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't have known, was that the gift's sudden disappearance had started a chain reaction I never intended. A whisper at the reception. A drunken toast that went wrong. A family argument that spilled out into the parking lot. And a secret, one I hadn't known, finally coming to light. It started with a phone call the next morning, then another, then something showed up at my door. And that's when everything truly began to unravel. The next morning, I woke up to the vibration of my phone on the hardwood floor. I'd tossed it aside last night, still turned off, not expecting or wanting any messages. But old habits die hard, and eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I reached over, powered it back on, and waited for the notifications to come flooding in. They didn't. Not right away. The silence was strange, almost unnerving. Just one missed call from a number I didn't recognize, and a single voicemail. That was it. I played the message. Jonas? Hey, it's Kim. I'm Ava's cousin. We met briefly, I think. I didn't know who else to call. Things got weird last night after you left. You should probably know what's going on. Call me when you can. Weird. That was the word she used. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just weird. I sat up in bed, my heart starting to do that slow, anticipatory thump it does before a storm rolls in. I didn't call her back right away. Instead, I got up, made coffee, showered, and tried to shake the feeling that something had slipped out of place. It wasn't until noon that my phone started buzzing again. First, it was my Aunt Miriam, one of the few relatives I actually liked, texting me a single line. Your mom is in damage control mode. You okay? Then came my cousin Steven. Yo, that thing you said last night about not being important? That hit hard, man. I think you lit a fuse. And then, finally, the one I wasn't expecting, my dad. Call me. That was it. No punctuation. No please. But something about it made my stomach twist. I didn't call any of them. I called Kim. She picked up on the first ring. Oh my God, Jonas. Thank you. I wasn't sure you would. What happened? I asked, skipping past the pleasantries. She exhaled. Well, you leaving with the gift? That didn't go unnoticed. At first, people thought it was just some kind of joke, but when the music stopped and you made that comment, honestly, half the room was stunned. Your mom looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. I figured, I said flatly. But then, she continued, her voice lowering, Ava made this weird comment about how she told you not to expect a seat, and someone, I think it was her uncle, asked what she meant. And she didn't hold back. I was quiet, letting her go on. She basically said you were just the difficult sibling, that you always make things about you, and that the wedding wasn't the place for broken family stuff. She said it like she was proud of it. I didn't respond. My jaw was tight. And Liam, she added. He tried to laugh it off, but then your cousin Ryan, the one from Seattle? He stood up, just stood up at the table and said, wow, you all really did Jonas dirty. And then, I don't know, it was like someone knocked over the first domino. I leaned against the kitchen counter, heart thudding now. People started talking. Loudly. Your Aunt Miriam got into it with your mom. Apparently your mom had been telling people you weren't sure you could attend, and that's why your name wasn't on any of the seating charts. But someone else, I think it was your old babysitter, said she saw the RSVP list and your name was checked weeks ago. I closed my eyes. Of course. It all just blew up, Kim said. People were whispering about the seating, about how weird it was that you weren't included in the photos. And then, someone mentioned the lake house. I froze. What about it? I asked, my voice low. Kim hesitated. I don't know the full story, but apparently there's been talk that it's going to Liam. Like, your parents already signed the paperwork. But someone overheard your mom saying that Jonas never really cared about the house anyway. And that's when your Uncle Ted lost it. That hit me like a punch to the chest. The lake house wasn't just a vacation property. It was where I'd spent every summer as a kid, where I taught myself to swim, where I fixed the roof with Dad one summer, sweating under the July sun. I loved that place. And when I moved out, I used part of my scholarship refund checks to help pay for renovations. It was my idea to turn the basement into a guest room. My money that paid for the new deck. And they were giving it to Liam. Behind my back. Kim must have sensed the shift in my breathing. I thought you knew, she said quietly. I didn't. She was silent for a second. I'm sorry. I shook my head. Don't be. Thank you for telling me. Look, she added. I don't know what your plans are, but you have more people in your corner than you think. A lot of us saw what they did to you. Some of us have been watching for years. I didn't know what to say to that. I just thanked her again and hung up. Then I sat down on the couch, staring at the box in front of me, the wedding gift that had started it all. I thought about the lake house, about the time, the money, the memories I had invested. about the way my family had treated me like a ghost, a liability, a mistake they had to tolerate. And suddenly, something clicked. I wasn't angry. I was done. Done playing nice. Done being silent. Done giving them the benefit of the doubt. If they wanted to erase me from the family, I'd show them what that really looked like. But not with shouting. Not with drama. No, I'd be surgical, quiet, deliberate, and I knew exactly where to begin. The next morning, I pulled the old lockbox out of my closet and dusted it off. Inside were years' worth of documents, receipts, invoices, signed agreements. I had kept everything from when I helped renovate the lake house. At the time, I did it more out of habit than foresight. I'd gotten used to keeping a paper trail when I realized early on that if something ever went wrong, no one in my family would remember or admit what I contributed. I flipped through the manila folder labeled Lake House Reno, 2017 to 2020. There were itemized receipts from the hardware store, printed emails with contractors, and even a signed letter from my dad, written on a yellow legal pad, thanking me for investing in the family legacy. I had nearly $28,000 worth of documented improvements that I'd funded on my own. I had photos of me replacing the railing, helping pour concrete for the patio extension, sanding cabinets, staining floors. This house wasn't just a memory to me. It was part of my life's work. And they were going to hand it off like it was a party favor. That afternoon, I made 2 phone calls. First, I called my lawyer, Janet. She'd helped me a couple years back when I was dealing with a tenant dispute, and I remembered how sharp she was. I laid everything out, my financial contributions, the signed note from my dad, the evidence that the house was in the process of being transferred to my brother without even a mention to me. "You have a case," she said flatly, "especially if you can show there was a verbal or informal understanding that this was a shared investment. That letter might be more valuable than you think." Then I called a locksmith in the area of the lake house. "Hey," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "I need the locks changed on a property I have partial investment in. Got all the paperwork, receipts, and legal docs. Can you do it by the weekend?" He could. Saturday at 9 a.m. The wheels were in motion. I didn't announce what I was doing. I didn't post on Facebook or send any dramatic family texts. I let the silence simmer. I ignored my dad's second and third texts. I skipped my mom's guilt-trippy voicemail. "You embarrassed your brother." And for what? A chair. And I didn't even listen to Liam's message, which started with, "Look, I didn't know how bad it looked, okay?" and ended with something about just wanting peace. They didn't want peace. They wanted silence. That Saturday, I drove out to the lake house, a place I hadn't seen in nearly 2 years. It looked just like I remembered. Peaceful, a little worn down from the weather, but still ours. Mine. The new deck I helped build was still solid. The stairs didn't creak. The door still had the same rusty screen hanging from one hinge. It was beautiful in its own broken way. The locksmith met me at the driveway. I handed him my ID and a stack of papers proving my involvement and contributions. He glanced through them and nodded. "Fair enough," he said. "Let's get started." An hour later, the locks were changed. The house was mine again, at least in the only way that mattered. Inside, I took photos of everything. Every fixture I'd paid for, every upgrade I'd made. I even found the framed family photo they kept on the mantle, the one from 2012 where I'd been cropped just slightly off-center, like an afterthought. I smiled at it and put it in a drawer. That afternoon, I drove straight to Janet's office and handed over the file. "I'm not looking to destroy them," I said, "but I want what's mine. I want acknowledgement, and I want it on paper." She nodded. "We'll file a motion for partial ownership and compensation for property improvement. If they try to sell or transfer the title, we'll file an injunction. They'll have no choice but to negotiate." And that's exactly what we did. Within 2 weeks, the family chat exploded. "Why is there a lawyer involved? Jonas, what are you doing? Do you really want to ruin your brother's wedding gift over a misunderstanding?" I ignored them. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. The same week the legal letter was served to my parents, I mailed back their wedding gift. I had rewrapped it, this time in plain brown paper with a typed note taped to the box. It read, "You said I wasn't important. This is me believing you." Then I blocked their numbers. The negotiations took 2 months. At first, my parents insisted I was being dramatic, that I had no right to the property, that my contributions were just help, not investment. But the documents were clear. The photos were time-stamped. The letter from my dad, His own words, in his own handwriting, became the final nail. Janet was a shark, calm, methodical, and merciless when she needed to be. She negotiated not just a partial ownership agreement, but a buyout option that forced them to compensate me for the full amount I invested, plus interest, or face a court battle. They caved. They wired me $36,500 to avoid a public dispute. That money paid off the remainder of my student loans. The irony wasn't lost on me. After the settlement, I got a letter from Liam. Handwritten. Long. He tried to apologize. Tried to say he hadn't meant for any of it to happen the way it did. That he loved me. That he hoped I'd be part of his life again. But there was a line that sealed it for me. He wrote, "You didn't have to go this far." As if I had crossed a line. As if fighting for respect was somehow a betrayal. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. 6 months later, I found out through a mutual friend that Ava and Liam had postponed their honeymoon. Something about financial setbacks. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. But I finally felt something I hadn't in years when it came to my family. Peace. Not the cold silence I'd accepted before. Real peace. Because I had stood up. I had drawn a line. And I had shown them that I would not let myself be erased. They used to say I was too sensitive. Now they knew that I was simply done being silent. Forever.